Okay, let's go ahead and take the roll.
Commissioner Adaro,
Here by phone.
Commissioner Cardenas,
Here.
Commissioner Hatch,
Here.
Commissioner Hayward,
Here.
Chair Remke.
Here. Okay, good morning. Just before we get started, I did want to provide a update and let everyone know that the Enforcement Division priorities and procedures, as well as the Streamlined Settlement Program review IP meeting has been set. It's set for May 9th at 10:30 here in the hearing room, or you can call in. All the relevant information is on our website under the IP meeting page. So just so everyone knows, May 9th at 10:30, please look at that page if you're interested in any additional information, including the material that's prepared to date from the various legal division and enforcement. Okay. With that, is there public comment for items not on the agenda today? Okay, seeing none, we will move right on to the first matter, which is approval of the March 2018 Commission hearing minutes. Any comments or statements from the commissioners on those minutes? Okay, is there a motion to approve?
I'll move approval.
Is there a second? Oh, I'll second. Let's take a vote.
Commissioner Adaro,
Yes.
Commissioner Cardenas,
Yes.
Commissioner Hatch,
Yes.
Commissioner Hayward,
Yes.
Chair Remke.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Okay. Next, we have the enforcement consent calendar, items 3 through 23. Do the commissioners have any items they'd like removed from the consent calendar to be voted on separately or to abstain from a vote?
I had two that I had questions on.
Well, questions, but do you want them removed from consent? Okay. Anyone want items removed from consent? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the questions. Ms. West, you want to introduce yourself?
Galena West, Chief of Enforcement.
Commissioner Hatch?
I just had the question on the two defaults. Would you just give us an update on what efforts and what results you got between this last meeting and today?
Certainly. For Gloria Almos, that was the one that we put over from last meeting, and we have been unsuccessful in getting any response from Ms. Almos, and she has declined, well, not declined, she just hasn't filed and won't be responsive. And Mr. Navarro was pulled from last month's agenda, so it wouldn't be considered because he reached out to us saying that he wanted to file his statements, not necessarily pay a fine, but he wanted to file his statements. And he did not do that. And then this morning at 7 a.m., he sent another email saying that he would do it and that he would file his statements, but still it was the same communication that we got last month where we did pull it off last month to give him that opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from commissioners regarding the remaining items on consent? Commissioner Odaro, any from you?
No.
Okay, any public comment regarding the items on consent? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion?
Move for adoption.
Second.
Commissioner Adaro,
Yes.
Commissioner Cardenas,
Yes.
Commissioner Hatch,
Aye.
Commissioner Hayward,
Yes.
Chair Remke.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Okay, I would just note that item 24 is a notice issue, and Ms. West, would you like to just tell us what enforcement is doing with these matters?
Certainly. In response to Commissioner Hatch's request that we give these matters more public notice, what we decided to institute was almost a pre-notice of default to get the word out in a public way to show the respondents that everybody in the world now knows this is a default that will be presented to the commission for approval next month. Please contact us, and to hope that their local media picks up on the story and contacts them for comment, which is generally the way default respondents start to reach out to us. So we're hoping that this will then spur people into filing their statements, coming up to date, and participating.
Thank you. I think it's a good idea. Make sure that even after the 20 attempts to contact these people, we give them one last chance, like you say, and probably the public notice is a pretty good idea. So, okay, so that's 24, no action. We'll probably see that, is that next month then it will be back?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. As for item 25, this is the executive director and the chief of enforcement are recommending that a hearing be conducted by an administrative law judge. After that hearing is held, the administrative law judge would make a recommendation to the commission on findings of fact, law, and if appropriate, a penalty. The commission would then have the opportunity to review the proposed decision and make any final determination. So if the commission agrees with that recommendation to send this matter to an administrative law judge, no action is required. Do the commissioners have any questions or comments on item 25? Okay, hearing none. So that will be then sent to an ALJ. Thank you. Okay, moving to item 26. This is the ongoing review of the Commission's Statement of Governance. As everyone knows, last month, the ad hoc committee made a presentation regarding a proposal on some changes. It was agreed that it should be done pursuant to regulation. So now we have a draft regulation from the ad hoc committee, draft regulation from legal division along with a memo, draft regulation from myself, the chair, with the one-pager. So that's where we're at now. We have a lot of options to discuss. And with that, I will first turn it over to the chair of the ad hoc committee, Commissioner Hayward.
Yes, thank you very much. So, yeah, first of all, although the chair's already done it, I want to make sure that people who have the documents we're going to be, or people who want to have the documents we're discussing have them. So there would be the agenda packet draft of ours, something titled to Chair Remke from Jack Woodside dated April 17th, something from Chair Remke dated April 18th, and then also there's a letter from the Governor's Legal Affairs Secretary that I think we'll want to take a little minute talking about. In addition, you know, following the procedure that we were supposed to follow regarding ex parte contacts, I want to let everybody here know that I shared our reg on the listserv the election law lawyers look at. I shared it with the former commissioners and executive staff that have worked with us on the ad hoc committee project. And I got back not very much. I got back 3 emails. If you're really interested, I could tell you who they're from. Or the LA Times will find out anyway. And that kind of disappointed me. So I'm here to try and invigorate the many smart people who either watch our broadcasts, listen to them, or are sitting in this room, that to the extent you have ideas on how the governance of the FPPC through our governance project could be improved, now is the time to share that, okay? So in that spirit, I guess, I also want to inquire of the chair and the executive director and the general counsel about your meeting with the governor's office last Friday. I'd love to know how it went.
I guess I could answer to that. I think how it went is the concerns expressed in legal division's memo were shared with the governor's office, and in response, you have the letter from the governor's office, which I think sets out a summary of their concerns that were shared with us. So I think that pretty much summarizes both ways of communication.
So you represent the commission as a whole in between meetings of the commission.
Correct.
And it was, what capacity were you serving in when you took the general counsel and the executive director over to the governor's office?
Well, that was, let me back up, because I think the capacity was as chair and the appointee of the governor. And I think the concern, as expressed both in legal division's memo as well as my memo, there are no secrets that there are considerable concerns with the proposal. And in fact, even the way in which it was drafted and created, which I really have no idea who's been talked to, who's been reached out to, what questions were asked, all of the above. But putting that aside, there are considerable concerns, again, that have now been stated in legal's memo, my memo, the governor's office. And as the appointee of the governor, I thought it was important that the governor's office realize that this ad hoc committee was attempting to really change, as I saw it, the structure of the commission, the role of the chair. New message from Mitch Rackala.
Sorry, I'll fix it. Okay.
And the role of the chair, which I thought is, and I continue to think is, inconsistent with the statute which was adopted by the people. So I thought it was a significant enough concern that it should be brought to the governor's attention. So that is the reason I went to the governor's office to discuss the concerns. As you stated, it seems very hard to get anyone interested in the way in which the committee governs itself. And we've had very little input from others. I mean, we could speculate why. Perhaps the regulated community sees the proposal as a benefit to them. Perhaps the good government groups don't really understand or care that much how we govern ourselves. But I think it's extremely problematic what's being proposed, and I think it's important enough that we did raise it to the governor's office.
I'd like to ask the general counsel a question. Do you feel like we have not been responsive to the various calls and memos that you've sent us?
No, it's not that you haven't been responsive. I think all of this is the structure. We haven't known about it for a long time. We haven't been able to necessarily weigh in on it. And so our conference call with you, that was really the first time that we had been able to talk to you about it. And really our concerns were with Bagley Keene. And we tried to get that across. And when you came back with the revisions, part of the concerns had been resolved, but there were still the 2-member standing committees. So we just felt like we needed to, keep telling you that we do have concerns like other state agencies do. And so that's.
Because I think the Bagley Keene concerns are not trivial, and I think we've talked about some ways of perhaps working on that. But it's really, I'm disappointed. I think there's a certain lack of candor here, and I'll leave it at that.
Well, I don't think that's appropriate.
I'm sorry, you're not recognized.
Yes, I'm actually the chair, and I'm recognizing myself. I don't think it's appropriate to say there's a lack of candor and leave it at that. Let's flush this out, because I think part of the concern, again, as I expressed I'm having, is the isolation in which these proposals are coming forward. And again, I understand that you and Commissioner Hatch meet, and you have conversations with others. Again, that's part of the concern about a 2-commissioner committee where you go off, meet with people, talk with people, review documents. None of that is shared. I mean, I just find that unusual that you're presenting a proposal to change the entire structure of the way the agency is run without a full disclosure of what's been looked at, what's been shared, who's been talked to. And so this idea of lack of candor, I just told you what happened at the governor's office and why. So I don't appreciate this notion that there's a lack of candor. And I think the concerns that I have, that legal division has, have been fully expressed to you. But then the way this is done is that I can't even know what they're saying to you until it comes out in a memo, which is really problematic. And I think the other commissioners, I would hope, would have the same concern that we don't see plans, proposals until the day of posting. Again, this is just a very awkward way to move forward for an agency that's about transparency.
Chair Remke, this is Maria Adero. Can I be recognized?
Commissioner Odero?
So I share the concern about the lack of candor. I didn't know that the chair went to the governor's office. I don't think we would have known, but for the fact that Commissioner Hayward just asked. It could have been included in the chair's memo because apparently the chair's memo is a result of that meeting, as I understand it. So I am troubled by that, especially in light of the fact that the chair, I still don't have an understanding of in what capacity the chair went, because if the chair went in her capacity as chair, then I don't think that what I understand was discussed was a representation of how the commission feels, because as the chair well knows, there's strong disagreement about these regulations. One way or the other, it doesn't matter. The fact is the commission hasn't taken a position. So to the extent that the chair went in her capacity as chair, I think is deeply troubling. If the chair went as a commissioner, then fine. I guess that I can go as a commissioner to the governor's office as well, and so can Commissioner Hayward. So, you know, I am a little troubled that we are just now learning that the chair went to the governor's office on this issue. I guess, well, we'll leave it at that. I do share the chair's concern about the problems of seeing some of these things for the first time, but I don't believe that that's a result of the ad hoc committee's function. I think that's a result of Bagley-Keene, as very well detailed in the Little Hoover Commission report, which I commend to everyone's reading for more reasons than just it's very interesting. But you know, the concern of the chair that a two-person ad hoc committee creates this problem, I think, is really unfounded, because we have no way of getting things done through if we appoint an ad hoc committee, which I believe the chair voted for back in the day, as I recall, and I could be wrong about that, but at the very least, it was voted on by the commission. So I think to now attack the ad hoc committee as not providing full disclosure is really just a very unfounded accusation, and I for one, am not in accord with that, and I just want the record to be clear on that. Thank you.
Commissioner Hatch?
I would like to ask the chair, and indeed the other two participants of that meeting, how you thought you were advancing the democratic process of this commission?
Sounds like a rhetorical question, but again, all I can repeat is that there's been concerns about the proposal that was obviously moving forward. And again, as the appointee of the governor and the chair of a commission, the only full-time member of the commission, I was concerned that the proposal was somewhat geared toward eliminating or severely nullifying the role of the chair, the governor's appointee, which again I felt was important enough to share that with the governor's office, in addition to just the problems in the proposal itself, significant drafting problems, the underground regs. Again, it just showed a certain lack of understanding of which the way the agency runs. And again, the greatest concern I have is that this proposal and this process, because it has taken, obviously, a lot of time from everyone to address these concerns. So again, my concern is that this proposal and the process in which it is being brought forward is really going to ultimately paralyze the agency in moving forward with the important mission we have. It's taken a lot of staff time. I know it's taken 2 commissioners' time. I just don't think this is a productive way to move forward. So I thought that was important to bring out those issues so that we could further the purpose and mission of this agency.
I have another question of you. Is this the first and only time that you brought this subject up with anyone in the governor's office? Or did you have other meetings?
There's been 2 meetings with the governor's office after the first draft, and then I would say to a large extent the second one was a request follow-up by the governor's office whether the concerns had been addressed when we expressed they had not been addressed. And as long as we're running through, let me finish, please, sir.
Over a month ago.
I don't think, it's almost as if,
We kind of filibuster. I ask a direct question that would be a yes or no, and then you give me a half an hour of,
I don't really feel that the cross-examination in which I'm being put under is appropriate. Nothing I did was inappropriate. Bringing concerns to the governor and his office regarding a commission on which he has 2 appointees, I think is more than appropriate. Now, again, if we're concerned about who's talking to whom, I think we should start with the list of who each member of this commission has talked to regarding this proposal. I've yet to see a single name. I just keep hearing references to conversations, concerns, and support. But so I think, in fairness, let's start going one commissioner at a time then and asking for who's everyone's talked to and reached out to and heard response.
Are you accusing this committee of violating the Bagley-Keene Act?
No, I'm just saying if you're as interested in my discussions regarding the proposal and the purposes for those discussions, I think all discussions are relevant in the concerns regarding this proposal.
Chair Allison did a laudable job of detailing all of the various people that we outreach to, past commissioners and chairs and executive directors and whatnot, and summarized it all in our first proposal, despite the fact that we have been busting our hump to react to the suggestions of council that weren't very done in a very cooperative manner. We let them know that we were trying to find out a way to make a 2-member committee structure work and help us work on language that would accomplish that. Instead, we get the alternative thing that would concentrate the power even more than it is now and make it less transparent than it is now. And now I find out today that you never even started to work with us. You immediately ran to the governor's office and tried to derail this thing. You pitched a story in the Los Angeles Times a month ago that described the last month's meeting as a pitched battle between, warring factions. And that was, if you look at the record, it was anything but that. I really resent what I feel is is an undermining of this process. You're supposed to articulate your concerns with us at the meeting last month. You didn't say a word, but you'd run over to the governor's office and got a letter put in the file the night before the meeting. And now you do the same thing again. I'm really disgusted at your behavior.
Well, that's unfortunate, and I think it's inappropriate decorum that we're reaching at this point, and I would ask if you could just try to keep this to the merits of it. Again, I don't think there is anything wrong with bringing concerns to the governor's office. Let me finish. Number one, of course, I did not write the letter.
Do filibuster
Get
on.
a letter. The governor's office acts on its own behalf, clearly not at my direction. But clearly they feel that there are significant enough issues here that they thought it was appropriate to write a letter. I did not put, again, I have no control over the LA Times and what they decide to write. So this, well, again, I think it's probably best if we go to the merits of the proposals and have substantive conversations, and I'm happy, again, to bring them out as to what mine are. You thought I didn't say anything last time. I was hoping that the ad hoc committee would hear the concerns that were stated. I didn't feel I needed to pile on, and that we'd come back with a different approach. That didn't happen, and that's where I felt I needed to offer an alternative approach, which I do think gives you what you claim the goal behind this is, greater oversight. So again, if we can get to the merits of the various proposals and see how we're going to proceed forward, I think that's the best approach here. And if we can limit the direct attacks on each other, that would be much appreciated.
All right.
Chair Remke?
You don't have the
I'm
floor,
sorry.
sir. Commissioner O'Darrow?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Hatch, were you finished?
I can say
I
that.
don't mean to interrupt you.
No, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I have a question because I've now heard this twice from the chair referencing these, I guess, what will end up being regulations in whatever form they turn out to be as underground regulations. And I'm very concerned about that terminology. I take very seriously the work that we do to ensure that we don't create any underground regulations. I believe that we are following the APA to the letter with respect to passing these regulations. And I'm interested in on what basis this accusation that this process is going to end up creating an underground regulation.
Are you asking for my response?
Yeah, I am, because you're the one who made the comment, so I'm just curious as to the basis for your comment.
Sure. As you know, Government Code Section 83112 explicitly states that the Commission may adopt, amend, and rescind rules and regulations to govern procedures of the Commission, but that must be done in accordance with the APA. I could go through line by line of the proposal, but in many places it talks about significant issues that would govern the commission, but it's stated in such things as adopt criteria, resolutions, policies, and again, my concern is the drafting of this leaves open whether or not there's an understanding that all of those things that govern the commission must be done pursuant to the APA and not internal policies, criterias, resolutions.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I thought that you were talking about the process that we were undertaking to pass 18308.1 and the ones that we have before us. I thought you were suggesting that we weren't following the right procedures just to pass those. But I understand what you're saying. I don't agree with it, but I understand your comment now. Thank you.
Okay. Further comments from commissioners?
Yes.
Commissioner Hatch?
At the last meeting, at the close of the meeting, when I moved that we not waste our time and go ahead and rewrite this policy that we had originally presented as a regulation. And I asked for two things at that meeting. I asked that we notice for this meeting a hearing without a vote for public input, and that it be scheduled with a 45 days notice. John corrected me to 30-day notice to have this put on the May agenda for vote. I find out this morning, just moments before coming in here, that in fact that was not done. And Madam Chair, you're in charge of the agendas. What happened? Why was that not filed when we submitted it for a 45-day notice, 30-day, take it as you will, still ends up 45 days. Why was that not done? I found out this morning has not been done as of yet.
I don't believe that that was either the discussion or the motion. I understood that this was, the proposal was going to be put in regulation form and brought back as pre-notice, which it has. So to the extent that that was misunderstood, I don't know what I can tell you other than my understanding, and I guess I should say thought was that these were still preliminary regulations or proposals and not something ready to be sent out to the Office of Administrative Law, that they were still open for discussion. I'm getting the sense that they're not open for discussion and we're not going to get to the point of discussing the merits of the proposals.
So you felt that you didn't have sufficient direction to go ahead and file the 30-day notice when we submitted the language to you in the regulation format?
I never received the language in the submitted regulation format until the day of posting, which was April 9th. That was the first time I saw the language in the regulation format. Again, at that point, I continued to have serious concerns regarding the language, and I was hoping that we would get to a discussion that has been suggested we would on the merits of the proposal and that things would be changed. So again, it did not seem to me, even as of April 9th, that we had anything that would be sent to the Office of Administrative Law. That's correct.
Well, I think you let us off a cliff, and I'm now wondering whether or not it was on purpose. I repeatedly asked at the end of the meeting if you had it where we wanted to have two things. We wanted to be able to discuss it at this meeting and vote on it in the May meeting, and that you said, oh, well, we'll pre-notice it for this and we'll notice it for that.
I don't recall that discussion that I said there would be a vote in May. Again, I know that we talked about turning these into regulation form and having a pre-notice at this meeting. That is what I recall. That is what's happening. Again, I did not see the language until April 9th. Again, I would suggest that we get to the merits of these proposals.
Notwithstanding that fact, you sandbagged us.
If by sandbagging, I put an item on that was requested as a pre-notice, now we follow the procedure. If there's amendments or changes to the pre-notice regs, we would modify it and send it to the Office of Administrative Law, hold an IP, and bring it back in a timely manner. That's what's happened. I'm getting frustrated by the notion that having a discussion one meeting, fixing something and bringing it back for a vote as another meeting is sandbagging, and this need to rush things through at this commission that have been of the practice of late is troubling, and I don't think it's consistent with the notion of this agency and transparency and full discussion.
I would remind the chair that the 2001 policy that stands today was in fact meets your definition of an underground regulation. We were more than happy to, when the issue was raised by council, we immediately said we want to redo this as a regulation. We didn't screw around with it, and for some reason I didn't get a copy of the minutes this morning. That's why I was fumbling when you were asking for a vote on the minutes. I now have Commissioner Hayward's copy of the minutes. And there is an interchange between yourself and myself about this very issue and about it being noticed for both at the same time for a 30-day notice. I said 45. I was corrected to 30 so that it could be voted on the merits in May, but would have a public hearing for input in April. So here we are. It's now the April meeting, and I find out today that that notice was never given.
I'm not sure where you're referring to in the minutes. And again, I'm not,
You got your minutes?
yes, but again, I'll repeat, I'm not under cross-examination. I'm trying to move this process forward.
You just called
We
into
didn't-
question my reading of the minutes. Do you want to know the page number?
Actually, I don't.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Okay, yeah. Oh, sir, please. Again, if you could just try to conduct this in a professional manner.
If
where
you would
we
be
know-
straightforward with this commission, we wouldn't be having this kind of discussion.
It's getting to the point where I'm going to have to say you're out of order.
Yeah, you're out of order.
Okay, perhaps we should take a 5-minute break so everyone could calm down and we could try to move this forward in a more professional manner without the personal attacks. Again, Commissioner Hatch, I'll say for the third and final time, I did not receive your proposed regulations until April 9th. I'm not sure what you thought I was supposed to be sending forward to the Office of Administrative Law before then. I had hoped that your changed regulations would have addressed the concern. So I anticipated a significantly modified proposal even as of April 9th. But it was changed, so again, nothing could have been sent to the Office of Administrative Law before April 9th. Is there anyone else who has anything to say regarding the merits of the proposals?
What happened to the break?
Do you want a 10-minute break?
Yes, I would.
Let's go off the record, and we'll come back at 5 minutes to 11. Okay, let's go back on the record. Commissioner Hayward, would you like to bring us through the substantive issues of the proposal?
Certainly.
Madam Chair, can I interrupt and ask a question real quick before we go to the substance? I do believe we should go to the substance, but I just have a question.
Commissioner O'Darrow?
Thank you. And Commissioner Hayward, thank you very much for allowing me to interrupt in this way.
Go right ahead.
During the break, I didn't leave, and my phone, of course, has a speaker, and I overheard a conversation that I would like some clarification on. And I think the conversation was picked up by the mics in the area, so it is what it is. But it was a conversation between the chair and I couldn't tell the voice. If it was either Mr. Fieser or Mr. Woodside, but it was a discussion about getting clarification on the 30-day issue that Commissioner Hatch had raised, and whoever it was, Mr. Fieser or Mr. Woodside or whoever the male was, said to Madam Chair, "Do you want some support on your position?"
It was Commissioner Cardenas, and I'm sure he could respond to his comments directly.
Yeah, I would like to understand this off the record. Do you want some support conversations that are being had?
Sure. I have no problem with the chair of any commission in this state meeting with the office of the governor. I particularly have no issue with the chair of this commission meeting with the governor of this state, both in the chair's capacity as the chair, but also as an appointee of the governor. If the state of California's political economy has been marked by anything the last 45 years or so, it's been by Edmund G. Brown Jr. and by the Political Reform Act. And so for his office to have an interest in this, indigenous or brought to their attention, is, I think, as it should be, and entirely in keeping with the Genesis letter of intent of a sacred law that was passed during the governor's early days. The other thing that I said was that I do want to ask what was the nature of Commissioner Hatch's question regarding agendizing something for this month, and what became of that request?
And I think in particular, if I'm correct, Commissioner Cardenas, you were asking regarding the discussion of the 30-day versus 45-day. Brian?
I'm looking at the exchange, and I apologize completely. I see where you could read that to, you were suggesting that it needs to go for adopting soon. What was proposed was a pre-notice discussion, and in my entire time here, we have what the idea of the pre-notice is to discuss it prior to noticing it with OAL. So we have never held a pre-notice discussion prior to or after noticing with OAL. So I think there's just some confusion there. I can say in order to be up for the next meeting, it would have had to go to OAL on April 3rd. I mean, the timelines there are pretty difficult to meet. But like I said, in my entire time here, we've never held a pre-notice hearing and after a notice to OAL. OAL needs a rough copy of the regulation, and the idea with the pre-notice meeting is to prepare that rough copy that we're going to provide to OAL. So I'm sorry if there's any confusion, but I don't see where it was specifically directed that we would come up for adoption at this meeting. I see where that could be implied, but I don't see it expressly said. So I'm sorry if I misunderstood.
When
Commissioner Hatch?
when Chair Hayward submitted the redrafted version with it in a regulation format, it was timely not only for the 10-day notice for this hearing we're having now, but also to meet the 40-day timeline to be on the May, but it was just not done apparently.
I do believe we received it before April 3rd. I'm pretty sure we received it before April 3rd. But my only thought would be that the idea was that this was for a pre-notice discussion of that regulation, which gives us the opportunity to look at it, modify it prior to noticing it with OAL. That's what we've always done with the pre-notice meetings. So if I misunderstood, I apologize.
But you do see more than once I asked for that clarification. This was going to be both notice for both purposes. 117 and 118.
I don't recall that. I mean,
Well, you just read it.
I did. I just read it. I don't recall that at the time. I see that I responded that we were going to be doing a pre-notice discussion, and then there was another conversation that at that point that I was no longer involved in. I don't recall that portion of the conversation.
You just don't recall being present or listening to that portion.
Right, I do not
okay.
recall that portion of the conversation.
Obviously, it did happen, but yeah. And I had raised in follow-up, I had raised, when you talked about a pre-notice, I was not sure what that meant, and that's why I was trying to get clarification that I was going to get a notice for both purposes. I guess now the question is, being as we kind of got short-sticked here, how can we get this back on track as quickly as possible? And
I mean,
if we serve the notice today, when could we?
the soonest I did those numbers a second ago, and the soonest we can get it would be June 4th, which would be a Monday. If you were trying to hold it for a Thursday meeting, it would be June 7th.
Say that again.
It would be, June 4th would be a Monday.
You
would be
notice it today,
Right. If it would take
40
till June
days from
4th.
now?
Pardon me?
I'm not.
The math is, I can go into the math if you want to. It gets
No,
kind of
that's
boring, the explanation of how that works.
No, I just.
June 4th would be the soonest we could hear it. If it
40
was,
days is what you said you need? Even though it's a 30-day notice?
it's approximately 40, 45 days.
It's a kind of a flexible number, I guess, when you.
It's all about publishing schedules.
So if you add 45 days to today, and that takes us to what?
June 4th.
June 4th, okay. Reflecting on that. Chair Hayward,
Why don't we get to the item at hand?
thank you.
I don't think there's much more that can be said about that. Okay, I'm going to start working on the ad hoc committee version, which is distinctive only in that it has a footer in a font typeface that is different than the body. So if you're looking through a pile of documents, that might make it easier to spot. And I guess I will do that at the same time with the legal division's memo. I am going to flip past the cover memo and get to the regulatory language. If there's things in the cover memo after I'm done with this that you feel need to be amplified, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll just let people read it. Okay, so the first little wordsmithing thing that I'm going to explain, because it's either my credit or my fault, depending on how you look at it, is the use of FPPC or agency. You guys highlighted that for us on the first page of our reg. The reason I want alternatives is because I think sometimes if you're talking about the commission, meaning the 5-member body, and then you talk about the FPPC in the same sentence, it's almost like they're synonyms, and interpretation could be more confusing. Where if you've got a sentence like that and you use agency instead, then everyone will know it's the full entity government agency that we're talking about, not just the 5-member commission. But there are other times where I felt like the abbreviation FPPC read better. So I was using both to mean the same thing. Now, other people have done wordsmithing too, and what was, I thought, a fairly defensible and helpful distinction, I think now is a little less so, and not pointing at anybody, but so there you go. That was my intent. I still think it probably is a useful way to have, in certain sentences, a word other than the word FPPC when you're talking about the commission as a body. So anyway, that was that. Page 2. I thought the comment here and the strikes are to suggest that when we're talking about recommendations by these various committees, that they are somehow limiting the commission to act independently without a recommendation. That was never our intent. We thought it didn't read that way. We've got some ideas for how to change that. But we heard you on that one, and I think we'll have something that hopefully will satisfy that objection. On our own motion, the language on line 16, upon recommendation of the Law and Policy Committee, the Commission will take positions on efforts to amend the Political Reform Act. Obviously, our legislative portfolio can be broader than that. We don't just take positions on what other people are doing. We can propose our own. And so we're going to want to reword that. I don't want to nail this down, but I just want to tell you that I think that it'd be something along the lines of recommending and taking positions on amendments to the Political Reform Act or something like that. But it seemed a little limiting. The overlapping committee recommendations at line 18 and 19 will change so that we don't have that. That was a lingering Bagley-Keene issue that I feel like we did not grab on the first go-round. But in general, the comments that suggest that these committees have any sort of authority independent of whatever they recommend being approved by the full commission is not what we want. And to the extent you see wording that suggests that, we will, that's not what this is supposed to be about. It's also not the case, we believe, that when a committee is working with, say, a member of the staff and making a recommendation, that that's somehow intimidating to that person. I would like to think that as the system evolves and moves forward, that people will know that it's a collaboration, that people can disagree, and that ultimately it's the commission as a body that decides, not the two-member standing committee or somebody else, or the mailman or whomever it might be. Now, I understand that the big elephant Bagley-Keene issue really involves the fact that if you've got a two-member commission, a third commissioner, the chair or a different commissioner, can't jump in the pool with them. So one way around that would be what's been suggested, which having like an advisory commissioner tagged onto these various issue areas, and that advisory commissioner would pair up with either the chair or the executive director, depending on which committee. Another way that I think is also worth talking about is the fact that anytime the third commissioner wants to listen to what the standing committee is doing, the standing committee can have a noticed and agendized committee meeting via conference call. And there's nothing around under Bagley-Keene that says that that third commissioner can't listen. Can they participate? No, but that's an exemption. And we went back and forth with Ted Prim quite a bit on that one. Or you could notice an open public meeting and have everyone participate. And it would be a commission meeting. Now, that's a little harder to do by conference call because my memory serves, a human being that's a commissioner needs to be in this room when a full commission meeting meets. But I don't think that's the case with the standing committee, or at least I couldn't find anything that suggested that. I've seen with other governmental entities, the standing committees have like a regularly noticed, weekly, monthly, whatever, depending on how busy they are, conference call. And there's a number. And for the, 2 or 3 souls in America that really want to listen to that call, I'm not trivializing it, but I'm saying realistically, that is a way of doing that. I guess my feeling is a lot of Bagley-Keene issues have been pointed out to us, but I don't feel like I've gotten a whole lot of suggestions for resolution of those issues, other than, oh, don't do what you want to do. Well, okay, maybe ultimately, but right now I'm not ready to give in on that one yet. I want to think a little harder about that. Let's see, next comment was involving.
Could you say page and line, please?
Oh, sure. The legal divisions doesn't have page numbers, so give me a second. Okay, I'm on. Okay, that's 1, 2, 3. I'm on 3.
Okay.
The comments have numbers too, if that's helpful.
Yes, comment A5.
Okay, thank you.
Even better. Thank you. I went through my life opposed to track changes and comments in documents. So I'm a real troglodyte when it comes to this stuff. Yeah, on, so A5 is the one correcting us in how we were referring to the Commission of Opinions versus informal or formal assistance. And we heard you, and I think we have fixed that, because you're right, we weren't saying it quite right. Next page, 4. I thought, and comment A6, I may just not understand. It says, by statute, the commission can delegate to the chair or executive director. To the extent that this language attempts to limit delegation to the executive director, the language conflicts with the statute. But the language says chair and, oh, that's yours, executive director, okay. I'm not sure that the statute means that everything has to be delegated to both of them. Is that what you're trying to say? Help me out with that.
These are going to be limiting to future commissions, so the idea that this regulation says these kinds of functions have to be delegated to only the executive director would seem to conflict with the Act's option that the commission, whoever the commission may be at that time, could delegate to either or. And so all I was trying to emphasize there is that the delegation from the commission could go to either of the two individuals under the statute.
Could I ask a question? Allison?
Commissioner Hayward? Commissioner Hatch?
Thank you. I was curious, in your drafted suggested changes, you add back the chair and then tell us we have a Bagley-Keene problem because you did. Why would you do that? I don't understand what the point was.
Well, this is just talking about the delegation of authority, so.
This is the blue line stuff on C5. I guess it's paragraph 5. Delegating execution. It's the top of that page that has comment A6 on it.
Okay, I mean, this just goes to the delegation of authority, and the only point that I was trying to emphasize, or we were trying to emphasize, is that restricting a future commission to delegate these only, obviously it's the commission's prerogative who to delegate the individual duties to, the chair or the executive director, but a regulation stating that these authorities can only be delegated to the executive director is somewhat problematic.
This is just on a specific item.
Yeah, can I?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you now.
Yep.
Yeah, because 83108 says the commission may delegate authority to the chairman or the executive director to act in the name of the commission. Oh, that's between meetings. So which are you looking at?
I'm just reading the language as drafted stated that the delegation of the commission policy and strategic objectives to the executive director. It's a restriction on future commissions to only delegate to the executive director.
Yeah, but if we don't put it in a reg, it's an underground reg. So if the future commission doesn't want to do it that way, I guess they'll have to change the reg.
I would read that reg to conflict with the statute that says it could go to either or. So
This is, we may
Okay.
on a specific, okay.
Okay, I think we've said what we need to say there. Now, comment A7 is the same section. And I think I don't understand think I don't understand. Can you help me out, Brian? Mr. Lau?
Ultimately, what we're pointing out is that there are other regulations at this point that delegate authority to the that control the executive director's delegated authority, which should be looked at. The other issue was that this notwithstanding language is somewhat unclear to us. It seems to read that 18361 doesn't apply. The new language applies regardless of what this other regulation says, is how I read that. So it's just a matter of drafting and determining how we're going to delegate authority under, are we going to delegate it through regulations? Are we going to, if we do, we should examine the existing regulations to determine if those regulations are still valid versus whether or not those regulations need to be corrected or amended as well.
Okay, I think, Commissioner Hatch, do you have any thoughts right now?
Yeah, actually, I anticipated that argument when we wrote that the way we did. We only have notice to what this one regulation. And if we intended, my intent was in drafting that was that we would then come back and notice an amendment to the other regulation that it conflicts with. Having reviewed it further, and Alice and I have been working on another draft to take into consideration more of the suggestions you've made, that language would completely come out. So it's really not an issue at this point. It's in my mind, not in the public venue, though.
Okay. And then there's the perennial, not perennial, but I don't know what the word is. Comment A8 about what the term is for people that we sort of colloquially call executive staff. We want a word that includes division chiefs, the communications director, and the legislative director. And I know they're not alike in the sense of civil service rules. I know they're not alike so much maybe in the way the organizational tree is written, but from this side of the dais, they all seem to be individuals who have particular portfolios that they work on as chiefs, for lack of a better word. So that's what we were struggling with why we were using executive staff as kind of a term for that. Now, is there a better term that we use in other parts of the reg that would capture the same thing? We could define executive staff for purposes of this. You think that's a good idea, defining executive staff for purposes of this? Okay, let's define executive staff for purposes of this. So. Awesome. So I'm going to run by the changes to the standing committees. I like comment A9 about the way you suggested rewording it. I think that's a good idea. And then we get into, okay, the authority of the chair, comment A10, is again with the problem, the Bagley-Keene problem with the two-person advisory committees. I've already given you a sense of sort of where we're headed, and we want to constructively come up with a way so that a bipartisan standing committee can work with staff in a formal way that people expect, understand, respect. It's not a surprise. And instead of the sort of ad hoc way that commissioners now sort of, dive into issues and then, there's a squirrel and we dive after that issue, and there's a butterfly and we dive after that issue, something that's a more regular and that everyone knows what to expect. That's the goal, okay? So let's not lose sight of that. And I think many of the executive director comments are in the same vein. Again, I'll reiterate, I'm not sure that I agree with you that if the commissioners on the standing committee make recommendations to the executive director that she's going to feel like they're more than recommendations. I think Ms. Peth is perfectly capable of telling me when I'm wrong.
Excuse me,
Yes, Commissioner Hatch.
somehow, though, the language we had was being misconstrued by legal to mean that we were, in fact, advising staff when, in fact, or I should say, we were making recommendations to the commission, not to the staff. And so we've undertaken in the draft that's under polishing right now that would completely separate the recommendations of the committees. We take all the language out of the commission stuff, where it says upon recommendation of, all the stuff would be gone. There'd be a separate list of things that that the committees within their jurisdiction might make recommendations, and we would take that language again out of the other parts, so it would be completely disconnected, if you will. And I think that seemed to be a chief concern of legal.
Yes, that is a chief concern.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's my run through the legal division's April 17th memo. Have I inappropriately glossed over or missed anything else you feel like I need to talk about before I move on to Chair Remke's proposal?
I have a question.
Yes.
Going back to, never mind, my question, I answered my own question, I apologize, thanks very much.
It's great when that happens. Okay, gentlemen. Oh,
Committee Chair Hayward,
Commissioner Carden.
if I may.
Yes.
It's not substantive. There's a clerical error in the memo, the cover memo. All reference to section 11125.5 should be 11122.5. But it is a 21st century clerical error, so every one of those is wrong.
Yeah, I picked up on that myself.
Consistent.
I looked them up, and they were completely unrelated.
Yes.
Anything else, gentlemen? Commissioner Cardenas.
I have a question probably tucked inside of a concern, or maybe it's the inverse, I don't know. The concern that I have from both a board and a staff perspective, because I've been on each in different but important, uncomfortable and disquieting ways. And what I'm really referring to here, I think, are two concerns. One is power relationships or unequal power relationships and expectations, merited or not, that perhaps naturally arise from inequality of power relationships and dynamics. And the second is a chain of command, communication, and ultimately C-cubed type issues, the ability to lead by knowing what the hell's going on underneath you. And what informs my perspective on the one hand was an experience long time ago as a commissioner of the Board of Public Works in the city of Los Angeles, which some of you may know is a 5-member commission, not unlike this, where the only official act of the governing body was any vote of 3 or more. And that posed a number of complications for staff. We did have a situation there where there was no executive director. It was added later with good cause, but there was no executive director. Each of there were a number of bureaus, 7, I believe. And each of the commissioners was kind of a lead commissioner with respect to their department, but we could speak to any of the bureau heads. The challenge is that there can be so many cross-cutting and oftentimes conflicting, not necessarily intentionally, communications and directives and communications which are taken as directives by subordinates, by staff, such that it really complicates the ability of either the five-member governing board or an executive director, had we had one at the time, and that's one of the reasons why it was changed after I left, to understand what in the world is going on, who's talking to who, what's being suggested to who, what's being quote-unquote recommended to who. And I don't have a ready answer. I just want to put on the record that this is something that, if it moves forward, is really going to have to be closely monitored with candor and hopefully civility, because it can get really, really complicated, mushy, and not in a good way. I've been involved in organizations, both public and private, where boards of directors in a private context or governing boards in a more public context are able to speak to staff. Well, first of all, I've been involved in organizations where they're not, other than through the executive director. I've also been involved in organizations where communications could be had with anyone in the organization, as long as the CEO or the executive director was at least given a courtesy notification of the fact that such a communication had been had. For example, a CC or some representation to the head of staff that about the basic contents of the communication. It was a little bit laborious for staff in that particular context, because then staff would essentially have to memorialize in a nutshell. I mean, this need not take the place of the real work that needs to be prosecuted. But in a nutshell, executive director, I had the privilege of meeting with Commissioner so-and-so today, and this is what we discussed. So that there is a funnel, one choke point, and it should be co-located in the person who has the ultimate responsibility for leadership and direction, which is further complicated by the fact that, at least in this commissioner's reading, that's essentially bifurcated over the last 44 years between the executive director and the office of the chair. But the other concern, which is less about organizational clarity and chain of command and making sure that we're not undermining the authority and the responsibility and the ability of the executive director to do her job with some semblance of a sane communication org chart, if you will, is the issue of how things can be perceived between individuals where there are remarkably unequal power relationships in an organization. And the power continues to reside with this commission, properly so. We are talking about not devolving, but certainly delegating certain responsibility and authority to committees, not the authority to act on behalf of the commission, which the legislature would have to change that, or the people, but the authority to make recommendations to staff. And I'm highly uncomfortable with that term, because I've also been on the other side in another context at the LA County MTA, or at least that's what it used to be called at the time. When I first moved over there from the Board of Public Works, I was the chief of staff. And you can say that the person in superior power is merely making a recommendation to the staff, but that is very often not how it's received by the staff, for all the understandable reasons, and very often reasons which would never appear on a balance sheet. There's an awful lot at stake here, and people know that the power is up here. And people know that these people, the people up here, we almost literally have to be impeached before we leave, before our term. And so before our term is, typically we're not going anywhere. And that's pretty daunting from a staff perspective. I will tell you, having been not a CEO type position, but really damn close to it, on behalf of a humongous staff with some very powerful leaders. So I just implore my colleagues to give some thought to the dynamics of this and the very legitimate concern that I feel staff clearly has with respect to the implications of this movement. And the majority of us, we're all lawyers, and Commissioner Hatch is a better lawyer than many real lawyers that I've, so-called real lawyers I've met in the past. There's a lot of legal acumen up here, and we know that words have meaning and words have power. And I don't believe I've got verbiage, Commissioner Hayward and Hatch, that goes to this. I'm still thinking this through, but I think there are some very legitimate concerns that are being raised. But it's not just the verbiage. I'm hoping that we can feel the feelings, if you will, of what's going on here. It's a very uncomfortable and disquieting experience to be a staff member and to be meeting with someone like one of the five of us or two of the five of us. Perhaps particularly in the absence of the executive director, and a couple of people who are one vote away from having an official action, from being effectively the commission, are giving you a mere recommendation. That may not be formal power, but that's a hell of a lot of soft power, and sometimes the difference is indistinguishable.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think Commissioner Hatch corrected me before when I was sloppy in saying that the standing committee recommendations would go to staff. They do go to the commission. I'm, as a former staffer also, quite mindful of the dynamic that you're talking about. And I struggle with how to balance that with our duty to ensure that there's oversight of the commission, because there's got to be some communication to make the oversight happen. So with that, let's move on to...
Commissioner Hayward, I'm sorry for the interruption. There was one thing that just related somewhat to what Commissioner Cardenas just said.
Okay.
That I to engage in just sort of a discussion about how the on the ground, at the office here, how this situation would affect us on a day-to-day basis. Perhaps it's better if we discuss that after going through all these, or discuss it now. I don't know how you prefer.
Well, let's go through, I feel like right now what we're doing is we're talking about what's happening with the thing that was on the agenda. And that's important to talk about too. But let's do this first. Anyway, with that, let's move on to Chair Remke's proposed regulation. I think I'd like to turn it over to the chair. What do you want us to get out of this?
I think the one-page memo, for the most part, speaks for itself. I hear loud and clear the concerns and the desire to have more oversight. I will just say part of how we got to where we were when you joined was pattern and practice of prior commissions and their desires to be involved or not so involved. And so a certain pattern and practice arises that people are comfortable with, and we proceed down that path. Now, obviously, there's a very different commission than there was, for example, 4 years ago when I started. And I think my first point, though, would be, and I guess it's that commissioners should be more involved, should raise questions, but I continue to believe that the appropriate way is the way we are doing it with other issues, the enforcement process, the streamline process. I mean, we are about to discuss the closure letters. We've discussed Bagley-Keene questions going to the AG. I mean, when issues arise and concerns are expressed and commissioners would like to look into something in more depth, I think the way that we could have been doing it, and perhaps could do better at that even, though, is in this public forum where there isn't the concern about who's talking to whom and when and what's being said. I think that is not only more transparent, I do think it is a better use of resources. Right now, for example, I'll just use the 2-member ad hoc committee as an example. We have 2 members doing a lot of work. We have staff doing a lot of work. And then we come right back here and we do a lot of work as a commission. And I just wonder if we couldn't have taken out a step by bringing the issue here to do the work as a commission. With that said, though, I understand this desire to have more, I guess I would say, of an inside view of what goes on at the commission. I would caution, though, I think that's probably going to be different from commission makeup to commission makeup and how much commissioners have time and want to dedicate to it. But nevertheless, with the committee structure, that's why I think what legal has suggested is an appropriate way to bring a commissioner into each subject matter area, understand how the commission is actually functioning now, what policies we actually have now, and then again, through those discussions, through that opportunity, then raise questions that can be discussed before the full commission. So with some of that in mind, so again, I do have concerns. I'm clearly the only one raising it about the proposal and the limitation of the role of the chair. I don't say this just in my role, because again, I'm on the final legs of my 4-year term. I think this is for future chairs as well, and I have concerns. As the only full-time member of the commission, I do not think the proposal on the table by the ad hoc committee understands or appreciates that the chair does need to have day-to-day involvement and communications with the ED, the division chiefs, and staff. So those are the things I tried to address in my proposal. There was the original proposal by ad hoc, there was the amendments, and then the staff made amendments. I tried to go in and make amendments to staff's amendments, but I realized you really can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear at some point. So I just decided to start fresh because it was getting too hard to follow, as you mentioned before, Commissioner Hayward. So that's why I started fresh. I think what I'd like to draw the commissioner's attention to is the structure of the role of the committees. And if you still want to stay with the 2 commissioner committees, which I do share very much so the concerns, and again, just the transparency issues, resource issues, Begley-Keene issues, but I would encourage the ad hoc committee in this next round of drafts, I understand you're making, to look at least to page 3 of this proposal. I think the committees, whatever shape they take, need to have more structure as to what their goals are, and then again, what the restrictions are. So that is what I tried to do on page 3, starting with paragraph 3 and moving down through paragraph 5. So I would highlight that as far as the committees are concerned and the restrictions.
I'm sorry, I think our either page numbering is different, or are you referring to the material that starts out each committee will be responsible for?
Yes.
Because I've got that on page 4, line 5.
I know, mine's different too. I think sometimes the memo was page 1 and sometimes it was not page 1.
I just want to make sure.
I think did you get that printed today? Anyhow, yes, it is section subdivision D, structure and role of committees, it's called, starting with paragraph 3, each committee will be responsible for, going through paragraph 5. I do think if we're going to continue down the road of committees, they need to be clear on the structure, the purpose, and then again, most importantly, I think the restrictions, which we've already talked about. It doesn't seem to be a dispute that they will only be making recommendations, but I think it's important that it be put in there. And then again, an overall riding theme, which perhaps is partly what Commissioner Cardenas was addressing, is this notion that these committees do not get into the daily operations or management of the commission. That's where I think it's really going to be an issue if committees don't understand that it's bigger policy set by the commission, leaving it to staff for the daily operations. I did get that language from I got it from CalPERS actually, in their governance, something similar about the limitations of committees. So that's where that came from. That's all I have to say. I'm happy to answer any questions about this proposal. But if you want to just go ahead and make a motion to adopt it, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question and maybe.
I have a question.
Oh,
Commissioner Adair.
Thank you. I'm a little confused. I feel like I'm getting mixed messages, and it's completely possible that I'm just not understanding something, so I need some clarification. On the one hand, we have the legal division throwing Bagley Keene at us at every corner, right? And, you know, I respect Bagley Keene. I understand the need for it. But the whole issue that the legal division has presented with its track changes on the original regulations proposed by the ad hoc committee is, you know, the second you create a two-commissioner committee, bad things happen. All hell breaks loose, fire, and, you know, and they paint this horrible picture, all premised on it could create a serial meeting. So I have a concern about creating policy based on it could create a serial meeting when we're all fully aware that Bagley Keene prohibits serial meetings. To me, that is like saying, you know, we have traffic laws that say, you know, you can't speed beyond, I don't know, wherever you are in the country, 65 or 75 on a freeway, and then saying, but because we know that there is a possibility that some people will speed, we're just not going to let you drive. And I just don't think, and I think that that's the perfect analogy for the legal division's position of you shouldn't do this because you might violate Bagley Keene, when in fact we're not going to violate Bagley Keene because we're fully aware of it. So that's my general thought on the admonitions from the legal division. But then I have the question, and now here's the mixed message part of this. In Chair Remke's proposal, she suggests that the legislative and law policy committees should consist of two commissioners, one herself, and then one other commissioner. So I'm wondering why the chair would think that this works in light of the legal division's admonitions that we shouldn't create two-member committees. And I would not want to hear that because the chair is one of the commissioners in the legislative and law policy, then Bagley Keene is not at risk of being violated because the chair is just as much a commissioner as we are. So I need some clarification on that.
Sure, I'm happy to address my understanding and why I think the one advisory commissioner with either the ED or the chair is the better approach. I, again, as I've said all along, think when you create the two commissioner committees that are going to oversee every feasible activity within the agency, you are, in effect, cutting out the chair of any and all discussions from the ground up. I think part of the role of the chair is to help develop policies from the start based on the working knowledge of how the agency operates, the daily interaction with the ED and the executive team. So I think the idea here was that if you have two commissioners who are not the chair, the reality is, as we saw through this ad hoc process, the ED and the executive team cannot work with or discuss with the chair what's been said and going on at the ad hoc committee. So the idea was that at least the chair can still stay engaged and or the ED stays engaged from the ground up on these policies and issues we're talking about, so that they're working with the advisory commissioner. That was the purpose, and that's the goal.
I have
So-
a legal
But I
question.
guess okay, hold on.
Commissioner Ardero, go ahead, and then I have a legal question.
Okay, thank you. I understand the goal. I don't agree with it, but that's beside the point. We'll have to vote on that. But what I'm confused about still is how it is that there is a threat to Bagley-Keene when two commissioners when an advisory committee is made up of two commissioners that don't include the chair, but there is no threat to Bagley-Keene when the committee is made up of also two commissioners, one of whom happens to be the chair.
Well,
That's where I'm confused, and I feel like that wasn't answered in your statement. So I'd like some clarification on that.
I guess I could just try to restate the same in another way, which is even under the ad hoc committee's proposal, the chair still has the limited role, I guess I would say, of overseeing the executive director and making sure the executive director is complying with all policies and proposals. But my point is, it will be very difficult for the chair to do an effective job of overseeing the operations and making sure that the policies are being executed pursuant to the request of the committees, the commission, if the chair cannot have dialogue with the ED or executive staff about things that are in development or discussions that were had. For example, you adopt a policy through a committee, it comes to the full commission, it's approved, and then implementing that policy, arguably the ED would only be able to go back to the committee to ask questions and get clarification. The chair is out of the loop as far as executing that policy. I'll just give you commissioner compensation as an example. We recently adopted a policy. There are questions about how to execute it and implement it. And there are discussions between me, the ED, and the chief of admin about what that language meant, what that rule is. Do we have to bring this back to the commission or not? Now, again, I would be completely out of that. I mean, perhaps that is one of the major focuses of this proposal, is to take the chair out of any oversight of the agency. Again, that's not the job I signed up for, and I doubt that future chairs would be excited about stepping into a position where their hands are tied to do anything, and that would be the concern. So again, I think it's just the reality of the daily operations of an agency with a full-time chair is involved.
So we're the only, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I thought you were finished. It sounded like there was silence.
No, this is Allison, and I have my legal question, which is burning to be asked right now. Why doesn't the staff briefing exemption apply?
I'm not sure. Can you give a little bit more
The
full?
Bagley-Keene staff briefing exemption. Staff can confer with commissioners just as long as they don't tell other commissioners what the other commissioners have said. I mean, that happens all the time. You know.
Right, but that's the concern I think that I have, and I'm not sure I'll let legal speak for itself, and it's definitely discussed in, is it the Hoover Commission report? Again, it's the spoken wheel issue, and I know Ted Prim talked about it. When you have a chair who can be, the hub, the hub, communication can continue to flow, not sharing what also was said before, but at least the chair can share that information as needed. If you take the chair and say the chair can't be part of the wheel.
No, it would be the executive director or a staff member. I'm not sure that the chair can be the hub of a wheel, and I think that's not my understanding of how Bagley-Keene works. My understanding was that if you have staff working with voting members of a body, the staff can do that as long as they're not facilitating some sort of secret dialogue among those voting members. So the example of, say, we passed a policy about compensation. Well, there's no more dialogue or work to be done on that, and so I don't understand why you would feel that Bagley-Keene had any application there. I mean, it's a policy now. You implement the policy. Nobody's conferring about it anymore. Nobody's voting on it anymore.
Well, there are questions, and people are conferring on it, is my point. And I would assume that...
There's no way that we knew about it.
Yeah. How could we be conferring on it?
Again, staff is conferring on it.
I mean, voting members, hon.
Right, and if there needs to be an amendment to the policy to address concerns, it would be brought back to the commission for a vote.
Yeah, and then it's a fresh new day. I mean, I really think, I think the interpretation of Bagley-Keene we're bumping around here doesn't reflect the Ted Prim best practices training thing that he did, doesn't reflect stuff I've read. I mean, tell me where I'm wrong, but I think that 2 commissioners could work with Aaron about whatever, and you could ask Aaron about the same whatever, and as long as she doesn't divulge what we've been talking about, you're fine.
But then again, I don't know what's being discussed or what's being processed or how it's going to impact the agency. I guess, again, it's either you have a chair that's actively involved and understands and can share the concerns and or approach or ideas of the agency, or you don't. And this proposal clearly says the chair is not actively involved in the development of policies. I think the proposal would be, and the concerns would be considerably different if all the policies were already adopted, and we said there's 2 commissioners for each subject matter jurisdiction who oversee the adopted policies, and they meet and make sure things are happening, and they bring up issues that arise. I think it's different, which is part of the concern I have about this approach, is the scope of what it's anticipating, which it is adopting new policies in almost every matter in which the agency works, and that all issues would first have to run through these committees before they go to the full commission. Again, the chair will not have an input or will not understand what's happening from the commission level, the committee level, until it's before the commission. I don't think that's a good approach. That's just, again, clearly we have a different perspective and a different notion of the role of the chair. And so I guess we're probably not going to agree on this.
Commissioner Ardero?
Thank you. Going to the role of the chair, and Chair Remke, you said that, one of the things is the role of the chair is to help develop policy based on daily interaction. I think the role of all of the commissioners is to help develop the policy, and we all develop the policy at the commission meetings where we vote. Policy can't be developed behind closed doors and out of sight of the other commissioners. You would agree with that, right? So, tell me if you disagree with that. Let's start with that, and then I'll go on.
Well, again, I would just say I think to some extent we're seeing this play out with the governance principles and the ad hoc committee. I would argue that it was developed behind closed doors without input from, first of all, staff until after the fact. And again, I still am not sure who talked to whom about what. All I know is that it was, so I think that's...
I think you're twisting what I said. What I'm saying is you want the role of the chair to be somebody who, because the chair is a full-time commissioner, gets to be involved in everything and gets to develop policy without it getting to the committee. To the commission. That's not how we develop policy. And that may be a very fundamental difference in, you're right, and how at least I can say some of us, from what I'm hearing, believe the role of the chair should be. I don't believe, I for one, and I'll speak for myself, don't believe that the chair should be making policy, making any kind of policy type decisions without concurrence or vote by the commission. That's why we meet once a month. So I believe that the role of the chair in developing policy is not at all impacted by the regulations set forth or proposed by the ad hoc committee, because policy is made by votes at the commission meeting, and the chair has a vote just like everybody else. So that's one thing. Again, I do want to go back.
Well, can I just respond? Can I respond to that first comment?
No. Can I just finish?
Commissioner
my thought?
Ardero?
Thank you. So, and I do want to make the point that I still have not heard the answer to my question of why Bagley-Keene is not threatened when an advisory committee has two members, one of whom is the chair, but is absolutely threatened, if you listen to the legal division, when it has two commissioners, one of whom is not the chair. And I don't know that that's a question for you, Chair Remke. Perhaps the legal division, who has taken this position so strongly, could address it. That's my
Commissioner
question.
Hayward,
For
can
now,
I just make a clarification?
Sorry?
I'm letting the chair make a clarification, and then we'll go to the legal division. How about that?
Thank you. I just want to clarify, my proposal and my position is not that the chair develops policy, end of story. The point, if I was unclear, was that the chair helps those recommendations move forward in light of the daily operations and function of the agency, that all come to the commission for a final vote, number one. I think that's clear in here because I adopted in my proposal all the same restrictions that the ad hoc committee had on the chair's authority not to adopt, change policy, adopt rules, change rules. So I put all those restrictions because that's not the point. The point is just understanding as they move forward. And I would say that's not the sole role of the chair, and that's why the proposal also has the advisory commissioner on each issue to be part of that discussion. That's all I wanted to clarify.
Commissioner Ardero, are you good?
Oh, no, that's fine. I'm just waiting to hear from, I guess you're going to turn it over.
Yes, I'm going to turn over to legal division. I just, because you're right now a box talking in the middle of the table, I wouldn't be able to get any cues or anything. Okay. Legal division.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Sure.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is Brian Lau. It's not that there's no Bagley-Keene issues if you have a two-person committee with the chair and another commissioner. It's that the Bagley-Keene problems are not as severe. From a staff level, we don't know where we're getting direction from a two-person committee and the chair on the side. It's very hard from the staff perspective to try to wall off those communications. Yes, we can provide, we can accept information, we can give you the information, we can give commissioners individual advice, but it's hard to do that without some sort of conversation that occurs, and each one of those conversations have the potential of violating Bagley-Keene as soon as I happen to say something that came from me, from a committee member that was part of a two-person committee to the chair. So with the chair and the individual committee, we don't have that struggle every day because we can recognize that we've already spoke to the chair and the committee member, and we know not to discuss something with another commissioner at that point. But if it's two commissioners and even if we're only dealing with one, we have to think you're coming to us with the perspective of the committee, which is 2 commissioners, at which point that we are very hamstringed in the conversations that we could have with the chair, and that's executive staff, executive director, whoever happened to have those conversations with the 2-person committee. And with the chair being a full-time commissioner, being the only full-time commissioner, we're going to have that daily interaction, and I think we tried to highlight that in some of the comments that were made. When we start looking at something like a budget, the chief of personnel is going to talk to the chair about the budget in all likelihood prior to a point where the committee gets involved. And as soon as the committee gets involved, but if the chief had already spoken to the chair, then the chief's ability to speak to the committee is severely hampered. So, I mean, by setting it up with this structure, just that interaction back and forth on a daily level where we're answering to a chair and to other 2-party committees becomes very just congested.
Okay, that gets back to my confusion. I believe it is the case that if you've been talking to the chair about the budget, and then the 2 commissioners who are the budget call you up and say, we've got questions about how the budget's shaping up. You can answer those questions. You just can't say, and the chair thinks, because that's when you start facilitating a discussion about a matter under our jurisdiction or an item of business, which is what we can't do. I used to talk to clients that had common interests, and I was able to finagle that one. I mean, I'm not sure that it will really be, but we've put off the practical conversation. And so maybe what we should do at this point is.
Can I ask just to see, so I can understand it from a different point of view, can you help me understand why the ad hoc committee is firm on the 2 commissioner per committee proposal as opposed to both legal divisions and my proposal, which would have a commissioner on each committee?
I will speak for myself, and then Brian will speak, because I think we came at this from different angles. As a member of minority party, I'm concerned about bipartisanship, and I'm also familiar with how standing committees in other contexts work, and they tend to be 2 or 3, depending on how big the group is, individuals, not the chair, because it's a check on the chair, and it's a way of oversight in some respects. And so that I don't think you get with the designated, budget gal and the designated legislative guy. And I think that the concerns have been raised are legitimate ones, so I think we can work them out. Mr. Hatch.
Yes, coming at it a little differently. My experience showed me, and it was borne out in our interviews with past commissioners and chairs, was that long before our current chairman took office, there had been a pretty long-standing arrangement where sort of management of the agency is bifurcated between the chair and the executive director. So to the extent that the chair wants to be involved in something, they can be involved in it. If they don't have to. It all then falls to the day-to-day to the executive director. All of this happens historically in sort of a way that the rest of the commission really doesn't know what's happening until suddenly something's on the agenda for their approval. And a lot of the inner workings that are done in the name of the commission, I'm not talking about what the chair does here, I'm talking about staff, that the commission has, in its current operation, no way to meet its oversight responsibilities to assure that things are getting done the way they're supposed to. And so my view was you need subcommittees, if you use that term, that are advisory to the commission, that would do its investigation, take its information back, and to the extent they feel necessary, make recommendations to the full commission for them to either act on or say, you got no problem. What we got back from legal was what I've come to understand is the, quote, Getman model, where you have the chair and one commissioner who not only can act in private, but can actually take action without ever bringing it back to the commission. To me, that's less transparent than what we're proposing. What we're proposing is that these two-member committees do their investigation, their oversight, bring it back to the commission, and talk to the commission about what they found, what they think is broken, or what can be improved on. And then, and only then, is it up to the commission to decide what, if anything, to do about that information. The Getman model is completely anti-transparency. And it's not been conducted in that way during this chairmanship. I don't mean to impugn the chair in that regard. I'm just saying there's a long-standing practice of doing things in a way that are not transparent at all, and things fall by the wayside. And this is a way to do that. Now, we got overly enthused and had proposed 4 committees. Legal has pointed out to us that too many opportunities for people to know things that they shouldn't know. So then we come back, we propose only 2 committees so that there's no overlap. Nobody's on 2 committees so that they don't have to worry about managing the information. And what I see myself in the original governance principles are language that says that the chair, at its discretion, can get involved in the day-to-day management. But what the standing committees are doing is just doing oversight. We're 2 different things, apples and oranges. Now, if they happen to step into a subject area together, or not together, but independently of each other, I would just suggest that, as my chair of the committee has already pointed out quite clearly, is that you got to manage your communications, just as lobbyists have been required to manage their contacts and make sure they don't violate the PRA. Just because you talked to somebody about the budget over here and somebody else on a different budget question, you have that staff exemption as long as you don't tell what the other was thinking about it, and their opinions expressed. You can certainly share that information. Matter of fact, you have a duty under the existing policy that if one of us inquires about something and you give them an answer, you're supposed to then, through the executive director, summarize that and get the information out to all of us. I can tell you, in the year I've been here, that has never happened. I'm one of the most inquisitive kids on the block. I'm always asking questions, and none of that stuff gets passed on to anybody else. So I see oversight needed. I'm trying to do it in the least obtrusive way as I can. We take to heart every one of the recommendations that have been made by legal, and we've revised. We're on our, I think, 3rd or 4th version of this thing, if you count the policy that we started with. And I feel like people are just being disingenuous. And it was even, I got very upset this morning because I saw that from the very outset, you guys were going outside the system. And it feels like you weren't taking us seriously. You're just looking for you to dump us in the trash. And I got offended. So to the extent that I offended the chair, I'm sorry. But that's just how I felt. I'm still trying to work and make this, and we are yet polishing more based on our better understandings of legal concerns. But they too need to bend, lean in, as they say, and try and work with us rather than make it look like what we're doing is not possible.
Can I just, I appreciate that understanding, and I would just say, again, as to my proposal, which I do think would still allow the oversight, would still allow the involvement, as to your concern about the chair and one commissioner or the ED and one commissioner adopting policy outside the commission. That's again why I put in the restrictions, and I would just again say those same restrictions, regardless of what committee makeup there is, should be in there. And that is in my proposal as well, that it says operates to assist and is not intended to direct or adopt key policies, goals, or regulations. It's the same restriction regardless, again, of the makeup, I think is important. So I understand the concern. I just want to say I acknowledge that concern. I think regardless of the committee makeup, that has to be some restrictive language in there.
I would grant you that this draft that you submitted that I read this morning for the first time is better than what we got back, the last version that we got back from legal. But I would submit to you that in what alternative universe is it makes sense for the head of an entity who is involved in the day-to-day operations of the entity to be a part of the oversight to see whether or not they're doing an adequate job?
I guess I take issue a little bit, and I'm not sure where. It's been said now twice that part of the goal of this is oversight of the chair.
No, the agency, but you are involved in the management as well. You said yourself, and it's throughout the existing governance principles. So I'm saying if I were chair, I would expect somebody else needs to do the oversight work and let me know at a commission meeting what they see needs improvement or what needs, maybe not, just needs better communications. I don't know. But the point is, oversight needs to be objective, not involved in the management. And I can't see how you could set up oversight committees that are chaired either by this chief executive or the chair. They're just non sequiturs.
Well, again, I think the oversight is, and the goal I see of having that is more cooperation on the commission and working together with someone who's well informed about the daily operations, either the ED or the chair, and the advisory commissioner. That's, I think, a laudable goal, is that then perhaps these commission meetings can run a little bit more smoothly if people felt they had more insight and were working with the chair and the ED on issues. Obviously not going to always agree, but those disagreements could be brought to the full commission. So that's, I guess I say, the distinction. So
oversight is oversight. It's like an audit. You have to have somebody outside do the audit of the person who's operating.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
Commissioner Cardenas would like a microphone, and he has one.
I'd like to be able to speak into it and have it. Can I have the floor with the microphone?
Yes, you can.
For a
Lovely
little
floor.
well, forgive me if I'm missing a basic point. With respect to either of the two imaginations before us now, does either or both or neither contemplate that committees of whatever structure and composition would hold their deliberations in front of the people?
That's indeed a possibility. And that was something we were talking about earlier about the Bagley-Keene issue with, the chair being, roped off from what the two commissioners were doing. You could have an open conference call. And that number is made publicly available. Other agencies do it with standing committees. And you would notice the conference call number, you would have your little agenda, and it would go out, and you would do it without necessarily everyone having to come here.
What I think I'm hearing from my fellow commissioners is the perception, if not the reality, that there's been less than the transparency that should exist, particularly given our charge. And so I am heartened by that representation. I want to strongly encourage all commissioners that to the extent that we are individually going to arrive at an affirmative vote to adopt some kind of committee structure, that inherent in our vote be an explicit commitment to hold such hearings in the full light of day for the people to see. hearings, deliberations, meetings.
All righty. Do we have anything more to say about the chair's proposed reg? Seeing nothing and not hearing anything from the box in the middle of the table, the last document we have is the letter from the Office of the Governor, specifically from Peter Krause, the Legal Affairs Secretary. And there's sort of macro problems he raises, and I think what I was going to do is just address them the way I would answer them anyway. People can discuss them, and then I'm going to make the suggestion that there be a lunch break and that the ad hoc committee could use Commissioner Hatch's laptop to come up with something that hopefully encapsulates what we've been kicking around, not that everyone's going to be happy, and that we could share it when people come back from lunch.
So do you think the hour lunch break would be sufficient to?
Yeah.
Okay.
We know this document pretty well by now. Anyway, so be that as it may. Okay, Office of the Governor. I think, I think the observation that he's not sure that we need committees to do what we say we want to do, he could be right, but I disagree. I disagree in part because we need this to find out what we don't know. Right now, the approach is very sort of ad hoc and not organized. I mean, people will get a passion for something like the $50 annual fee, or speaking for myself, and it may be that makes sense that come up at that time, and it makes sense that there's something related that could come up if that commissioner knew about it, could be a little more sensible. And so, I feel oftentimes like I'm reading my agenda book looking for secrets. Why did this turn out this way? And why is this penalty like this? And I've read the reg and I don't see it, and I talk to people, and of course, if it's a STIP, there's limited amount to what Ms. West can tell me, but I'll try and suss things out a little bit, and then we'll go through a meeting, and I'll learn more after the meeting that was pertinent to what we were talking about. I just didn't know I didn't know it, if that makes sense. So I think providing the part-time commissioners with a real sort of portfolio that they can master would give me more peace in the knowledge that whatever committee Commissioner Cardenas is on, he's looking at that, and I can look at my thing and take a deeper dive in what my portfolio is about. And so that's my answer to that observation. Is it's really hard to say that the system right now is working well when I don't know what we don't know. Second point was Bagley-Keene point that policies, criteria, and schema envisioned under the regs would likely themselves be subject to the APA. And I think that's fair. I am still scratching my head over why the compensation policy doesn't have to be a reg. But this, yeah, I think actually it probably should be. If our definition is rules governing the procedures of the commission, then this whole notion that there's internal rules that don't have to be part of the regs is wrong, right? But, that's not an issue we're going to be able to solve in the next couple hours, and so I'm just throwing that out there as a concern. I'm concerned, too, about underground regulations. I'm also concerned about regulations that are so specific that they are difficult to work with. We tried to strike a balance in ours that was like not so vague you wouldn't know what we were talking about, but vague enough that you could cope. I don't know if we struck that balance, but we tried. If other people could strike it better, I am all ears. And then the final point that Peter Krause makes that made me angry was the proposed regulations appear to have been drafted with little or no staff involvement. Well, when we started out this process, we did a pretty good job of finding staff and commissioners who were alums, because I didn't want people to feel like they couldn't talk to us because they might have an unpopular opinion. I didn't want people to feel like they had some, skin in the game that was different from just talking about what they thought their policy preferences would be. And so that's why we did that. Obviously, we couldn't talk to current commissioners because they're Bagley Keene again, but we talked to a lot of previous ones. And we didn't get answers that were hugely different one from the next. And if people were really interested in who we talked to, there's citations throughout that large memo from 2 agendas ago with names. You can go see who said what to whom and why, and hopefully. Or, I had to produce my notes for a Public Records Act request. I'm happy to put them in a little notebook and share them with whoever wants to see them. So that annoyed me. And I'm sorry that Peter Krause didn't know that we had gone to the efforts we had gone to get input from experts and former staff. And then once we had a body of work that we could share, we shared it with current staff. And we reached out to every division chair and had a conversation with them on the phone, sometimes a couple. And I don't know what more we could have done, actually, realistically. I guess I could have moved up here for a month and parked at that table right there and talked to people, but that wasn't going to be feasible. So that's my response to Mr. Krause. I'm sure he's a lovely guy. If you're watching, I'll take you to lunch someday. Because you can't take me, because that would be a gift. Anybody else have anything they want to say about the yes. Commissioner Hatch.
Sorry, just procedurally, I know when we took the cool-down break that I needed, thank you, Madam Chair, we lost some of the people who were waiting to testify, and I'm afraid that we might do that again. So before we break, I think it would be appropriate to ask the public if they have any input.
Very good idea. Commissioner Cardenas.
Thank you. There was one other thing in the Krause letter that I'm not sure has been mentioned, and that is the concern that this commission acknowledge longstanding and hard-won civil servants protections. Do we need, would it not be advisable to have language in whatever we're going to be dealing with that makes it clear that there is no such interest in diminishing the...
We had tried to capture that. We can capture it even more. Yeah, it was, that was something that I have to say I was really not familiar with, and the executive director and the chief administrative officer both spent time with me on the phone to get me a little more educated, and so, I'd like to think that we're working on something that does that.
What are we doing, or what's being done with respect to either of the two proposals, and what are we contemplating doing after lunch?
My proposal was that at lunch break, the ad hoc committee, i.e. Commissioners Hayward and Hatch, get a sandwich and sit in front of Commissioner Hatch's laptop and try and come up with something that we think captures what we want to do and alleviates many of the concerns. I can't promise all, because I think the two commissioner committee thing is what we want to do. But certainly the chair's draft has good language in it I think we could put in, and then the legal division has called some additional things to our attention, and I think that's worth at least coming up back with something that we can all look at again and go, oh, or yuck, instead of, because we are talking about too many different documents right now.
Okay, great, because I do think that, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I do think that there are some language here in the chair's proposal that is quite enlightening and important.
Thank you. All right, we are now calling for public comment. It's your turn.
Must be green. There we go. Okay. Trent Lang, President and Executive Director of the California Clean Money Campaign. Thank you very much for your time. I'd again like to congratulate the ad hoc committee for its very important work on this document. It is a very busy time for the good government community because it's April and there are lots of bills happening in the legislature that we have to watch. But we are keenly interested in this issue, and as I think you saw at the last commission hearing, the significant number of public comments that you had in front of the commission were all in favor of the general concept of what you're doing. Now, clearly, that sorts of details need to be worked out, and we really appreciate looking at listening to this discussion. And I think that it would be important. However, I don't think that anybody would want the chair to be hamstrung in her efforts with the daily implementation of the policy of the commission. So whatever needs to be done to clarify that, I think would be very valuable. But I do think that from our perspective, mostly as somebody that has interacted with the commission over the last years on different legislation, I think we feel that the sort of subcommittee structure that is being proposed, generally speaking, seems like a very good idea. So there's an extra layer where more of the commissioners can be involved in the decision-making process at an earlier stage, rather than the significant delays that have happened and we have seen in practice on legislation that we've been involved with before bringing it to the full commission. So I don't know, and that's why I think we would agree in general with the approach of having two commissioners that are not the chair on those subcommittees. I think that makes sense. I think it definitely makes sense for the chair to be involved in the process of making recommendations to the subcommittees. The way that it's worked in the past, at least that we have witnessed when looking at legislative recommendations, it's apparently the chair and staff working together to make recommendations to the full commission on legislation. That would seem very appropriate to have that sort of thing still happen at the subcommittee level. But then the subcommittee, the legislative subcommittee or the law and policy committee, whichever one would have it, would then be able to weigh in and be involved. That seems appropriate. So whatever would need to be done to the governance to clarify that, I think would certainly be welcomed by us. We haven't had a chance to dive too deeply into it, but it does look, I would agree with Commissioner Cardenas, there are some in just close, not as deep as we'd like to look, but there do seem to be some things in the chair's proposals in terms of clarifying the responsibilities and limitations of the subcommittees do make sense. Maybe that would be something that the ad hoc committee could work into their own proposals where appropriate. And I'd also like to say that I really do especially agree with Commissioner Cardenas's point that the subcommittees should be, when possible, be open and noticed to the public so the public can be involved. I think that's a very useful aspect of this whole idea of subcommittees, especially when it comes to law and policy and legislation. Maybe there are some things with budget and stuff that it doesn't necessarily make sense for the public to be involved at different points, but I think that would make a lot of sense. So that is it. And again, we'd like to thank you for pursuing this. This does seem very important and much needed, and at least from our side, we're watching very carefully and very interested in this process. Thank you.
Any other members of the public who would like to speak? Are you awake? All right, then. Do I have the authority to call a lunch break?
I'll go ahead and say we'll take a lunch break until 1:35. Okay? We'll be back. I'll go off the record and come back at 1:35. Thank you. Okay. Let's go back on the record. Is Commissioner Odero on the phone?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're back. We have a printed draft in front of us, and I understand that it's the latest version has been placed on our website as well under the beginning portion of the public comment. What's it? labeled?
It is labeled Item 26, Updated Ad Hoc Proposed Regulations.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Hayward?
Yes, thank you. So, being the crack-efficient team we are, we prepared a draft for you guys to look at. We're only about a half hour late from what we promised, and I apologize for that. And we won't blame anyone just because we're moving forward in the spirit of positive communitarianism or something. So yeah, I just want to give everyone sort of a second to look at how we've reworded things, blowing out a lot of the recommendation language that was causing problems. Again, you know, when you write something and you know what you mean to say, it's not always evident that other people wouldn't read it that way. And so we finally got that through our heads. And then I wanted to point out that the committee limitations from the chair's proposal can be found on page 6, from roughly line 3 to 19. Again, you know, that was saying well and succinctly something that we already sort of hoped we were saying, but she said it better. So, so we still have a situation where we have two-person committees, which I know is a deal breaker for some people, but we think it's important. We have fixed the executive staff division chief issues. We have fixed the, with a typo, Allison, what the hell? On page 3, the changes that legal recommended regarding the policy or regulation governing reviewing whether something should be an opinion, formal advice, or informal assistance. Trying to think of what else I can point out to people while people are leafing through it. And maybe I should just give everyone a minute to read.
Commissioner Hayward, just so I know how carefully I should be reviewing this, I'm curious what the proposal is going to be as far as moving forward in light of the new language.
We would like to get a vote to move this forward for submission to OAL and approval at the soonest next meeting we can make, possibly a special meeting if the timing is weird and we can't do it in the ordinary course. I want to talk about that, though.
have one question, clarification, page 3, line 3. This is, it says, may by unanimous consent require a standing committee to give notice pursuant to Bagley-Keene to hold a public meeting. So you're saying that it takes 5 votes to, is it the 5 members or is it the 2 members of the standing committee? And
Oh, no, this is under authority of the commission, so this is the full commission?
so it's going to take 5 votes to say that something should be a public meeting as opposed to the normal 3? Is that what the proposal is?
Well,
There's also another provision in sub D. There's also another provision in sub D that's on page, let's see, let's just look at it. D.
Are you, this is Maria.
We're
are you
reading.
looking for- I'm sorry?
I said we're reading? No, I mean, I thought you were asking what we were doing.
No. I know that, it sounded like Commissioner Hatch was looking for that other reference to public meetings.
Yes.
Is it what's on page 8 at lines 20 to 22?
Yes, that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think what we're trying to capture is that if the commission feels that a committee is not being appropriately open, they can make them be that way. But you're pointing out that unanimous consent means that the people who don't want to have the open meeting are preventing the commission from ordering the open meeting, correct?
No, I'm just trying to clarify because currently it takes 3 votes to have action in this. So this is saying that it would take 5 votes to have action. I just want to clarify that was the intent.
Right. On page 8, as Maria pointed out, beginning on line 18, it talks about not allowing any other commissioner to, the chair or any other commission, to appear at a standing committee meeting nor communicate with a member of the standing committee about a subject within the jurisdiction of the committee. That's directly Bagley-Keene prohibitions. However, the committee chair may, in consultation with general counsel, give notice pursuant to the Bagley-Keene Act and hold a public hearing whenever the committee deems appropriate to do so. In the same manner as how you set a full commission meeting, the chair could set a open committee meeting.
So one can trump the other, depending
Well,
on
well, that's the thing. I think we were trying to anticipate a situation where there was an intransigent standing committee that didn't want to have an open meeting, but it was in everyone else's judgment that they should.
So this would trump the first one, the unanimous consent would trump.
The unanimous consent would trump.
Yeah, the commission ultimately can make a committee have an open meeting if the commission deems it appropriate.
Okay, I just want
This is
clarification.
Maria.
Yes,
Can I ask a question?
sure.
I think you said it earlier, though, Commissioner Hayward, that if you already have an intransigent committee that doesn't want to hold an open meeting, there's no way you get to 5 votes.
Yeah, and so I think the chair has pointed out something that's problematic.
Yeah, I agree. Can you make it
We could make it 4/5.
majority? Can you just make it majority?
Well, yeah, but that would be consistent with just regular committee or regular commission action.
Yeah.
You could make it 4/5, which would mean you wouldn't need the intransient chair.
Well, except that if you have both of the committee members opposed to holding an open meeting, then you don't get to, then the commission can't force the issue.
See, I'm not convinced that this is a real problem, because I'm not aware of that being a problem in other contexts I'm familiar with. And, I mean, Brian and I have gone back and forth on the vote requirement. And I think it wouldn't be bad to have it just consistent with any other commission action at your regular 3 votes.
Yeah.
But, because if we were asking them to, hold an open meeting, if with 3 votes of the commission can overturn what a committee recommends, 3 votes of the commission, it seems to be consistent with.
Well, there are certain subjects that the budget committee can't do in an open hearing. And that's why I felt it was necessary to have a supermajority to protect against that, although we could have specific language on that. It's something we could explore. Budget change proposals, as I'm sure, Aaron, you know, that they're specifically not public documents and must be held confidential from the public. So it makes it difficult you can't have an open public meeting of the commission or a committee on the subject of, or with a copy of the budget change proposal in the agenda package.
Yes, that's previous to it being in the governor's budget. Once something's in the governor's
Yeah,
budget.
but that's what we're talking about is, should we, is it adequate? That's
Right.
long.
I'm just
long-
clarifying on the timing of the
I get it.
release.
That's long before the legislature gets it. My past experience is that often governor's offices will prevent them from being available until after it's gone to the governor's desk. Then they do it. It's in the discretion of the governor's office. And so that ebbs and flows depending upon who's governor.
Yes, Commissioner Cardenas?
To the extent that the current conversation is centering on whether and by what supermajority a committee, if it were to be formed, is to be subject to the Bagley-Keene Act, either I misunderstood myself or the way that I phrased my concerns about transparency lent themselves to misunderstanding. What I meant to say earlier when I was seeking to echo the concerns about transparency of my fellow commissioners is that I firmly believe that every meeting of any committee established by this body be subject to the notice and open meeting requirements of Bagley-Keene. If that wasn't clear, I apologize. Let me make that clear now. I firmly believe that if any body in this state is going to adhere to the spirit and the letter of Bagley-Keene and the Fair Political Practices Act, it should be us. These meetings should be held in the open in the full light of day.
Actually, legally, Bagley-Keene does not apply to 2-member bodies.
It
So
does
we're not violating Bagley-Keene by holding them. And I would point out to you, just for information, that all 3 proposals, ours, legals, and the chair's, are written in such a way that they would be not subject to the Bagley-Keene Act.
Well, I'm saying they should be subject to the Bagley-Keene
Okay,
Act.
I get that. I'm just letting you know that it's a uniform approach.
No, I understand that Bagley-Keene does not compel the adherence by a two-member committee to the strictures of the Bagley-Keene Act. What I am suggesting is that as the Fair Political Practices Commission, presumably still interested in the kind of transparency in the operation of this commission and its charge, as I thought was expressed earlier today, that we would lead by example and demonstrate that even a two-member board, a two-member committee, can and should, and in our case will, be held in the full light of day. There's the letter of the law of Bagley-Keene, which does not compel a two-member committee of a state agency so defined to be held to the strictures of Bagley-Keene Act, and then there is its spirit, and contemplating that that this might be an issue. I'd like to read into the record the opening preamble, if you will, the policy statement of the Bagley-Keene Act itself. This is section 11120. It is the policy of this state that public agencies exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business, and the proceedings of public agencies be conducted openly so that the public may remain informed. In enacting this article, the legislature finds and declares that it is the intent of the law that actions of state agencies be taken openly and that their deliberation be conducted openly. The people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. The people in delegating authority do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is not good for them to know. The people insist on remaining informed so that they may retain control over the instruments they have created. I think having our committees, if we establish them, however many commissioners they be comprised of, must have all of their meetings noticed and held and open pursuant to and in accordance with the Bagley-Keene Act, its letter, but also its clearly enunciated spirit. Well, we are merely stewards of the public trust. The people have not delegated to this or any other commission to decide what of their business is appropriate for them to know and see and what is not, subject to collective bargaining, legal, litigation, and personnel actions.
I would just point out to you, I appreciate your concern, but just point out to you that, all of these versions, except the legal's proposal, certainly the chair's and our proposals, both envision the role is strictly investigation and advisory to the commission, and the commission, the committee reports to the commission at a public meeting their findings and their recommendations, which are not binding on anyone until the commission votes on them. I'm not sure, especially with respect to the budget committee, I don't know how you can have any budget oversight whatsoever in light of, and apply provisions of the Bagley-Keene Act to a two-member committee and still be able to provide your duty of oversight on budget issues because of the limitations imposed on budget change proposals. And even the actual budget proposal itself, when we as a public agency, or I should say a state agency, prepare a budget proposal to the Department of Finance, they expect us to treat that also as confidential and not share it to the public. Now, it's a balancing act. You get to not know and not be able to do oversight, or you have to find a way to do it in a way that complies with the administration's prohibitions on what they consider working documents that are exempt from public disclosures, and they enforce it rigorously.
I appreciate that. I would suggest that we that we try.
I'm all for trying to bend over backwards to do it as often as is possible, but I would not want to tie our hands to the point where we could not do our oversight in areas that were required to hold in confidential those documents. I think the public interest is in being able to do the oversight and make recommendations to the full commission where we see weaknesses in the agency's budget procedures and policies on how they react to the outside forces. And by that I mean, you know, legislation, budget changes that occur in the legislature. You know, we don't exist in a vacuum. We don't set our own budget and say that's going to be it. We have to, you know, withstand the budgetary process of the state.
I understand. I'm merely suggesting that I believe the people expect, and they should, that public oversight be attempted first. And then if that doesn't work out, then we move to private oversight of public oversight.
Well, I'm 100% sure on this budget issue. There's not a way around it for us. We either, you know, comply, just like you have to comply with Bagley-Keene if it applies to you, or not have access to the information. And I think that the public interest is served by us being able to do the oversight and report back structural changes that can make us more effective, not efficient, effective. And you don't have the money to do your job, then we can't be enforcing the laws and to the extent that we think we should be able to. We have a lot of legislation that passes that impacts our operation, and often because we're a small agency, we kind of get brushed aside, or we don't. It gets a sense of futility sometimes, and you know we don't ask for or get what we need.
Not to change the subject, but I'm about to change the subject. Have people had a chance to look at the new draft?
This is Maria. I have.
Okay. Commissioner Cardenas? Chair Rumke?
I mean, I'm trying to review it. I don't think it would be fair for me to say I've adequately reviewed it or the changes. I'm trying to make sense of it. I feel like there's some repeat provisions, but maybe there's a purpose. I can't anyhow. So I'm reviewing. I don't think there'll be a point today where I feel like I got it. So
Okay, fair enough.
Could I just offer as a overview on the extra language about the first 3.5 pages of this document are the Commission's duties and responsibilities with all the committee references stripped out, back more like it was in the existing policy. And then starting on the middle of page 5, you have an enumeration of, actually doesn't happen until page 6. You have an enumeration of the kinds of things that the committees would do in pursuit of their oversight. And it's clear that it's in each case making recommendations to the commission, not to staff of any kind. And so by separating that, it makes it clear, which has been a point of misunderstanding between us. And we likewise, there were also provisions in the section relating to the executive director's duties and responsibilities. And again, those were stripped out, the references to the committee's recommendations, and those are, again, in that same part of the document. So at least it helps to know where to look about what you're looking for.
Well, I skimmed my way to page 10, and I do see that the authority of the chair has been further drastically reduced from your even earlier version, from at least some oversight pursuant to commission policies to what I see here is literally limited to the agenda, and running the commission meeting pursuant to rules of order. So I guess I have to flush that out in light of whatever else is said elsewhere, which I'm not sure. But that's obviously a significant change even from your draft earlier today.
Right, and and I'm not happy with that, but I've been up against this Bagley-Keene block that the legal staff has pointed out to me, that there has to be that separation. So I'd be happy if we can figure out a way with legal to finesse that, but that's, we just couldn't figure out a way to get around it in light of all the various pieces of information that they provided us.
Well, I think the next chair will have a very interesting job to get a full-time salary for barely a per diem position. So, Commissioner Hayward, how would you like to proceed?
Well, I would like to hear what legal has to say. They've given us a lot of things to work on, and we've tried to incorporate them.
I guess just in my initial brief review, there's still problematic language. It does still have some issues. There's still something along the lines of the legislative committee taking positions, which appears to be the commission's official position between meetings. That's on page 2, lines 17 through 18, where it reads, adopt criteria to be followed by the Law and Policy Committee for taking positions on legislation.
It's criteria for taking positions, and that's something that the
But who's
commission has
taking,
given.
it reads as the Law and Policy Committee taking positions as opposed to the commission taking positions.
No, that's a incorrect construction. This is the commission, in all cases, taking the position on legislation.
I just leave it at, I think that language may need to be reworked a little bit.
Okay. Let's see what we can do on it.
I share the chair's concerns as far as the unanimous consent and the public meeting notice. If we're talking about Bagley, one says they can be called by the chair of the commission, of the committee, and the other one reads that it has to take unanimous consent. I mean, this
is when the commission itself would be forcing a committee to meet publicly, when the committee itself has decided it doesn't want to.
But 8 still reads as though the chair couldn't even appear at the one called by the committee. I mean, I think
Well,
all
it has to be public, yeah, in that case, sure.
This actually doesn't read that the chair could participate. I mean, I think that's your intent, that the chair would participate, but it could be read to ban the chair from participating at all, even in the public meeting called by the chair of the subcommittee. So I think that language also could still.
How would that possibly be under the law and the way this is structured?
Because the first sentence just simply says the chair is not allowed to participate at the committee meetings. And then it says the chair of the committee can call the meeting, but it doesn't actually address if the chair is going to be allowed to participate at that meeting after specifically saying that the chair cannot participate at the meeting. So I just think the language needs massaged.
I'll let legal do what it wants, but I'm not sure this is fair discussion at this point to say, legal, what's your position? You've had 20 minutes to review this document and then criticize them, or, it's either they're going to express their concerns or you don't want to hear the concerns. And I think most of their concerns now are at least with drafting and not necessarily even policy. So I don't know if there's a better way to do this than putting them on the spot right now when this is, like I said, I have more concerns than the ones I've highlighted, but I haven't had a chance to fully digest it, so.
I was asking questions. I don't think I was attacking anybody.
No, I'm just saying I don't know how productive it is, kind of, at my point is on the timing.
What was the page and line where you were referring to, Brian?
Page 8, I believe, is what, page 8.
Page 2, something, you had one?
Page 2 was the taking a position language.
Which line was that, do you remember?
Lines 17 and 18.
17 and 18? Okay, and what, the one on page 8, you said?
Page 8 was the not allowing the chair at a standing committee meeting, which is lines 19 through 22.
Okay. I think we can, as you say, massage it. I know that our intent was, the first clause is about the not noticed meetings. In other words, the non-Bagley-Keene meetings. And the second is to provide the chair of the committee the ability to set up public meetings so that the other committee members can participate.
Understood.
And we can.
I mean, I
work on that
understood.
together.
I think I understand the intent. I think the language.
Well, maybe you can work with us on
Absolutely.
smoothing that, yeah.
This is Maria. Can I make a suggestion?
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks. So I think it would be very productive if we could get some guidance instead of just saying, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. I think it would be very helpful, since you're understanding what it is that this is intended to do, for you to propose some language. And on some things, I think it's super simple. I don't think it takes a lot to think about how to fix this particular one. I would suggest maybe it says something to the effect of, adopt criteria to be followed by the Law and Policy Committee for reviewing and making recommendations to the Commission regarding positions on legislation fiscally impacting the operations of the FPPC. There. Problem solved. I mean, I think it is. You can tell me if you think it's not, but you were taking issue with the implication that the Law and Policy Committee was going to take a position. That's not the intent. Can we just fix it and move on, rather than just say, no, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't?
That's certainly what we're seeking, is that kind of a collaborative arrangement. How you can get to where we want to go. I seriously would like for you folks in legal to take a look back at this Bagley-Keene interaction and see if there isn't, I know we adopted the language that was written by the chair that makes it clear now that in addition to what they're doing is that they're limited, in a oversight role and not, being involved in the day-to-day decision-making processes. And I think there's some other provisions there. So likewise, could you develop some language around the chair that says that, she is involved in those kinds of things and not involved in the stuff that we're involved in, so that we can put back all those other things that you pointed out to us create Bagley-Keene problems. You see, is there a way that we could work together to do that? To bring back some of those?
I mean, it's not as if we're dismissing everything you're told. We're working and trying our best. I think so, addressing the Bagley-Keenes, we went with the Getman proposal because it was in the initial memo, it was in the initial government's proposal.
No, not in our.
Well, importantly, the Getman.
It said this is an option that would be available to us. So that's one of the reasons.
On the narrative. But
Yeah, in situations where we needed somebody to act in between commission meetings.
I mean, as far as addressing Bagley-Keene, I think Commissioner Cardenas' position of public meeting obviously addresses Bagley-Keene. I do think policy-wise, clarifying that the recommendations are going up to the commission, super helpful. So so that there's room But we are attempting to work with you as much as possible.
Yeah, so anyway, I'm just going to ask you guys to think if there's a way to build a fence between those two kinds of things so that the chair can exercise the traditional authority that the chair has had without bumping up against Bagley-Keene every time we turn around.
I think the very nature of the structure leads it to that. That's our recommendation, and
Because we kind of got there now, but as you see, the duties of the chair is a little skimpy.
I'm just, again, if the will of the commission is to, I think Commissioner Hayward said, move this forward to send it out to OAL. As far as the calendar is concerned, I mean, if the only request from staff right now is some of this wordsmithing, which they find to be unclear, and they could work with you to clarify some principles, I don't know if that would be a problem, and I'm just kind of looking to legal. If the vote was to move this forward before it's sent to OAL, could there be a day or two to do that wordsmithing without changing any of the intent in here, and still have it consistent to go to OAL?
yeah, we actually have till next Tuesday to get it to OAL and meet all the deadlines.
For what?
That still meets that's still the requirement for the April, what did we say, April 4th?
No, June 4th.
I'm sorry, June 4th, correct.
So then you could bring it to the June meeting, which is what
What-
day is the June meeting?
Wait a minute.
I'm just trying to get some dates down.
Yeah, but this should have been on the May agenda. It's not. Water over the bridge. Now we want a little bit of help getting it as fast-tracked as possible. And I don't want to wait to the regular June meeting to do so. You said June 4th?
June 4th would be the earliest we can consider it, period, based on the deadlines that are provided. And whether or not we get it to them today or next Tuesday, it's the same as June 4th.
I mean, I understand your frustration, Commissioner Hatch, but again, I stand by, I'm not sure how we could have sped this along when we're still drafting today, and considerable changes are continuing to be made as to the scope of this. So what
Which is
could have,
allowing
let
the
me,
process, is it not?
I would dispute how much, depending on the changes from the initial draft to this draft to the draft later today. I think the goal is to send to OAL the best position. You're saying this is what we're moving on, so everybody has sufficient notice of what's being proposed. You can obviously change it once it comes back, but the idea is if the changes are significant enough, do you have to send it back out for notice? So my understanding is, so if the earliest it can be voted on is June 4th and we have a meeting on June 21st, I understand there's talk of setting a meeting earlier, but I'm just curious on the 3-week distinction there, if that is something we need to really be pushing right now, or if we should instead be focusing on, if this is your proposal, let's get the language as close as we can, get it to OAL, and bring it back.
I would like to
Yeah, go ahead.
potentially offer two different motions. One is to pass this with the understanding that the wordsmithing will be happening between now and Tuesday, and get that moving. And then I'd
Changing the intent, just to clarify.
not changing the intent, just making this better. And then a separate motion to schedule a special meeting between June 4th and the regular June date. But those are two different motions.
Okay.
So, shall I go ahead and do that?
Sure.
All right, I would like to move that the draft of the afternoon of April 19th will be scrutinized by the able gentlemen of the Legal Division and the Ad Hoc Committee, with an eye to getting it as it stands, but better. Fifth.
The election, I was asking for the election.
Oh,
Because there is still an election going on.
that's true. very heated one in my little town. Yeah. Sasha, was that okay?
Could you read it back?
No, she can't, because I've stuttered and everything. Yes, Mr. Lau.
I was going to ask for a little clarification on the unanimous versus just a majority vote on the one issue. I'm not sure that we could draft something to Tuesday to, I mean, what would you like to see done by Tuesday related to that issue, I suppose?
Majority vote.
Yeah, I think majority vote's probably more appropriate.
Commissioner Hayward, if I may. I just want a clarification, Commissioner Hatch, with regard to just clarification on the duties of the chair, sort of left hanging, just for guidance sake. These are some sort of substantive issues. Are you talking about adding some more of the duties that are in the original or existing governance?
The things that, in desperation, we transferred over to the executive director because you carefully pointed out to us on all of those chair duties that they all had the same problem with this Bagley-Keene thing. And, well, I think it's the concept of having oversight committees composed of regular commissioners who are overseeing the management of the entity. To the extent that the chair is part of that, it's difficult to have her become part of that. But then there's this other thing about the distinction between oversight duties and management. And I think that there is a way that you can harmonize, I believe, this in a way that the chair can exercise her management duties without crossing paths with the oversight duties of these two committees, and vice versa. Now, that does probably require that folks watch their context to do as Commissioner Hayward has pointed out, what do they call this? Staff exemption, you called it?
Yeah, staff briefing.
Staff briefing exemption, so that you can brief but not, talk about the other's positions or views on the matter. I mean, with that firewall, I would think you could build a firewall, admonition language that prevents folks from, or requires complying with that, the letter of that exemption. I know, I'm searching here, and I know you guys are really smart, so I know you could figure out a way.
I mean, I think one of the Bagley-Keene ongoing issues, as I tried to say earlier, is this notion that all these new policies are going to be developed. And again, while new policies are being developed to exclude the chair from the creation of those, again, I think I've expressed, and I believe Legal Division is expressing concern just with those lines of communication. I think to the extent you put back the language that was in your earlier draft, which very limits the chair, but yet still acknowledges the chair acts on behalf between meetings subject to established policies. Again, I think it's different once it's the established policy issue. So you've got that one, you've got the chair has oversight pursuant to established policies. So
of the commission.
Yeah.
Not the committee.
Of the commission, exactly. So I'm saying I think you can put those back in. There's still, if I'm going to speak on my behalf, and you can disagree, Brian, but there's still.
I would like to see that. That's why I'm asking
Yeah,
to figure
I
out a
think
way.
you could put it back in. I think the point that legal is making is there's the ongoing concern that you'll invite Bagley-Keene violations. However, if that is what's going to be adopted, we'll just have to, like you say, work around it and put more firewalls up and be more conscientious of discussions. Again, I say we could do that. I don't think it cures the problem, and I think it creates tension between an ED, any ED and any chair. But again, we're beating a dead horse now. But if you want to put those provisions back in, it can be.
And I'm not suggesting that. If you
Yeah.
figure out a way for them to feel okay about it with whatever.
I just want us to have a little bit more direction before we, if we're going to be moving this forward. So I'm assuming what you're saying is on page 7 of the draft that that was on the agenda originally from the ad hoc committee, it talks about the chair's authority. And again, if if the proposal is the 2 commissioner committees, you can still have the chair doing all this. It's just going to be that ongoing tension between discussion and not discussion. I don't think that changes it, but I think you can put those duties back in.
I think that.
Can I interject something real quick, please? On the new policy question, I'm not sure we're going to necessarily be establishing new policies. It's more like identifying the ones we have to something that, your everyday part-time commissioner doesn't know except in an ad hoc way when a question comes up and you learn about it. So I'm thinking we're envisioning very regular and not persistent, it's getting late, I can't remember what the word is, a lot of standing committee talk to Aaron or to whomever. And there may be days where there's something up and they do talk to Philip or whoever. But I'm thinking there will probably be swaths of time where the standing committee doesn't really feel like it has to do anything because they're not involved in the everyday management. So I don't know. I mean,
And then maybe that's how it will prove out. So, again, to the extent there's acknowledgement that this latest draft really restricts any duties of the chair, I would suggest that you just put back the language you had in this morning. It doesn't alleviate the concern of Bagley-Keene. I think it just is an issue that is going to have to be played through and see how it goes. I mean, I think so the 2 options are right now, avoid any Bagley-Keene concerns, strip the chair of all say in involvement, or put the say and involvement of oversight of established commission policies, and we play it out and see how it works.
okay, yeah. And I think that's great guidance.
Just so I'm clear, I'm sorry.
Hang on. Commissioner Ardero.
Hi, thank you. I don't know that the 2 choices are as black and white as the chair has said. I think the chair retains all of her rights, like any other under this version, retains all of her rights, like any other commissioner, to affect policy because policy is created at commission meetings only. And so, this fear that the chair is being taken out of the policy-making role, I think is a red herring. So I would propose, and it's not my motion, and I leave it to Commissioner Hayward, but I would propose we vote on this in its form, subject to the wordsmithing by next Tuesday, I guess. And, to the extent that then the chair wants with time to convince the commission that what it has done in this policy is not workable with real-life examples, then I think it's something that the commission can consider on a future date and can always change this. So, I'm not convinced that the world will fall apart if, as we know it today, if we adopt this. I'm just not convinced, and so I think that we should adopt this, or vote on adopting this, and if we adopted, yes, that's fine, and if not, but vote on this and, address the chair's concerns with some real-life examples in the future.
Okay, there's a motion.
Okay, would you refresh?
And the motion, as I understand it, is to vote on this latest draft, subject to wordsmithing, and I think subject to the extent legal agrees it can be done, moving the duties that used to be under the chair back to the chair. That's my motion.
Okay, just 2 friendly amendments to be concluded by Tuesday.
It has to go to OAL, it would have to go to OAL by Tuesday, so yes.
Yeah, what
By Monday.
time?
Pardon me?
We'll do it by Monday.
End of the day,
So we'll
Tuesday.
do it end of day Monday, but, okay.
Yeah.
And the other was, provided that the wordsmithing will satisfy legal, that we resolve the comment 10, comment A10. The pages aren't numbered in your,
I don't have it in front of me. It's comment A10.
What does it say?
my eyes aren't good enough.
I'll read it. It's comment A10, Chair's oversight of the executive director is questionable if the executive director is communicating with two-person advisory committees, communicating between ED and chair, or communications between ED and committees will be substantially restricted due to Bagley-Keene. Again, I don't think you're alleviating that concern. I think we're just acknowledging that it exists. Is that correct, Brian?
That's correct. Whether or not these duties are articulated or not, or deleting them doesn't remove the concern. Just the nature of having a full-time commissioner over with staff, there's going to be an interaction there regardless of what these duties state. Remove them didn't really address that concern. We're definitely open to putting these back in as proposed.
Can you work on some window dressing then that would make it less uncomfortable?
Okay.
We can try.
Need any more
Between
clarification?
now and Monday, yeah. I
Well,
second
have
your
a-
motion.
I have a question. It was and remains my intent to offer up an amendment, a motion, to make a motion for an amendment. I was contemplating that there would be some notice that we could now make motions, but a motion was made and I believe is on the floor. Well, if I could articulate the intent behind my amendment,
Sure.
my proposed amendment, and then you may either accept it as a friendly or perhaps with some graciousness and comedy, we can arrive at another way to allow my idea to be voted on. And what I would amend, what I would move, if we could find the appropriate time and vehicle, is an amendment to the latest draft that we've been working on, which I believe is on the floor. Per the following. An amendment to Section 18308.1, Authority of Commission, subsection D, 1, new subpart H. In other words, at the very end of
Okay.
the wording that I would propose would be each committee shall conduct all meetings in compliance with the Bagley-Keene Act. And then perhaps to the extent such would not conflict with established state budgetary procedures. So I'd like that voted on by whatever vehicle.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure, go ahead.
As far as I'm concerned.
So if I'm understanding the motion, it sounds to me different than what you proposed earlier. Because to me, for a two-person committee to be in compliance with Bagley-Keene means necessarily, based on how Bagley-Keene is written and has been interpreted and has been trained, that it doesn't need to be an open meeting. So a two-person committee can conduct a closed committee meeting in compliance, and by closed I mean a non-Bagley-Keene noticed and open to the public meeting, and still be in compliance with Bagley-Keene. So I'm not sure. I don't know if that means you've changed your mind on what you said earlier, or we're not speaking the same language.
As I understand it, the Bagley-Keene Act does not compel state agencies to have two-member committees be subjected to the strictures of the Bagley-Keene Act. What I am suggesting is that if there is any commission in this state which should require that its committees be nonetheless subject to the Bagley-Keene Act, it is this very commission.
So if I could just,
So then by saying that it be conducted in compliance with Bagley-Keene, you're kind of saying the opposite. So maybe just to make sure that you have what you want, and then it can be voted on, but I think what you were wanting to say, and I don't mean to be, to put words in your mouth, but what I'm interpreting is you want Bagley-Keene, the Bagley-Keene open meeting rules to apply to the two-person committee regardless of the fact that Bagley-Keene doesn't require it.
Indeed.
Okay.
Since my mic is still on, may I further suggest that the letter of the Bagley-Keene Act is not required. I suggest that the spirit of the Bagley-Keene Act compels it.
This is Maria again. I don't know what that means, to be very honest with you. I think that's just too vague and ambiguous to be followed. That said, I understand what you mean. I understand what your goal is. I would only say that I think we need to then make this two separate votes, because one, adding that on could cause a vote that would not pass the.
Well, yeah, we'll vote on the amendment first
I would
to the main
separate
motion,
votes.
and then we'll vote on the main motion. That's oftentimes how it happens.
Yeah.
In real life. Okay, you've moved.
okay, I'll second.
Okay.
So are we moving, can I hear the motion again, please?
That the proposed changes to the governance regulations of this commission presented on this day include the following. Section 18308.1, Authority of Commission, subsection D, 1H. That's new, subsection D, 1H. Each committee shall conduct all meetings in compliance with the Bagley-Keene Act.
Again,
We can wordsmith that, just like everything else will be wordsmithed to reach his point, which is that they'll be subject to it, meaning that public meetings will be held. Is that correct, Commissioner Cardenas?
Yes.
Okay.
D1.
Okay. So there's a motion and a second.
So that's actually on page
Oh,
7.
and there's apparently public comment.
Yes, thank you. Trent Lang, President of the California Clean Money Campaign. Just want to say again, thank you for very fast work over lunch on these changes. I think that from our perspective, the spirit of Commissioner Cardenas's request that those subcommittee meetings be held in public whenever possible would certainly fit with our desires, and we believe would benefit the public in general. Thank you.
And you would then apply that to budget review? Where the
It seems to me more
information is
important.
required to be confidential, which means we don't do it at all.
No, I think that those issues are probably more, the public openness is more important for the legislative and policy committee discussions, which more interact with the public and don't have those same privacy concerns that you described.
Commissioner Cardenas, did you not say that you're fine with adding at the tail of your proposal that it says not including any budget discussions which must remain confidential under law or whatever the language is?
Yes, may I just recite what I think might work?
Yeah.
To the extent such adherence does not conflict with established state budgetary procedures.
What about personnel issues?
Yeah, that's another one.
Those are already excluded, and, well, actually, I'll let legal answer.
All right. So,
Thank you.
do we all understand what the amendment is?
Yes.
Good.
Did
There's
did
the-
you get that? His,
It's recorded.
okay.
There's a motion. It's been seconded. Sasha, could you please call the roll?
Commissioner Adaro,
No, I just don't think it's workable, no.
Commissioner Cardenas, Commissioner Hatch,
I abstain.
Commissioner Hayward,
No.
Chair Rumkey.
Yes.
The motion is tied. Abstain.
I beg pardon?
It did not,
Motion what?
no action is taken. The motion fails, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, so now there's still a pending motion.
Yes. The main motion of the wordsmithing of the regs that have been presented this afternoon. Do we need any more clarification or discussion on this?
Oh, it's just the provision where, that this wordsmithing would be come to a close by the end of,
We did
close of
that.
business Monday, and what was the other?
I think we did that. Anything
Sorry?
else?
I think the role of the chair, is that what you were?
Yeah, that we find a way to bring the, as best as possible, the roles of the chair back, consistent with our previous draft.
Okay. All right. Does everyone understand what the motion is?
Oh,
And
I
there's a second?
the-
Can you clarify, I'm sorry, there's just been a lot of discussion. So we're gonna vote on whether we adopt this with a version of things that are going to be put back that none of us are gonna get to see except for the two ad hoc committee members? Is that what you're asking us to vote on?
Well, it's going to
No.
look a lot like the previous version.
Right, the one that was noticed.
The one that was on the
In the
agenda.
packet, in the agenda packet. Under the,
Like or like? I mean, are you putting back all those duties? Or, I mean,
That's the idea.
I don't know what we're voting. I think this is, I think it's difficult to vote on this because I'm going to hang up and I'm going to go off on my trip and who knows what I'm going to come back to.
so-
I just, honestly, I just don't think that that's a good way to proceed because I think it leaves it so that it requires a vote on something that I'm not seeing. So
Commissioner Adaro, what would you prefer?
I would prefer voting on something that I'm seeing. Right now, what I'm seeing is this particular draft, and I think that that is something that I would feel comfortable voting on one way or the other. I would not feel comfortable voting on something that I'm not seeing. And I think that those other things can be brought in later by the chair if she wants to in the future with some evidence that the world has fallen apart without it.
High hurdle.
The motion that has been made and seconded includes moving the duties back as they were in the draft that was agendized, and having the wordsmithing done by Tuesday, and there's probably something else I'm forgetting. But that's the motion that we've got right now, and it's seconded. So it's live, and that's what we're going to be voting on now, okay?
Okay, that's fine.
All right. Sasha?
Commissioner Adaro,
No.
Commissioner Cardenas,
No.
Commissioner Hatch,
aye.
Commissioner Hayward,
Aye.
Chair Rumkey.
No.
The motion fails.
Do you want to try a different motion?
Okay, now I would like to make a motion.
Excellent. Go right ahead.
I move that we adopt the draft that was circulated after lunch, subject to wordsmithing that will be done by the ad hoc committee working in conjunction with the legal division to carry out the intent of what was circulated after lunch. Not changing the substance, but wordsmithing it so that it's workable.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Everyone understand the motion? Sasha, could you please call the roll?
Commissioner Darrow.
Yes.
Commissioner Cardenas.
No.
Commissioner Hatch.
Aye.
Commissioner Hayward.
Aye.
Chair Rumkey.
No.
The motion passes.
Okay. Are we able now, Commissioner Hayward, to move on to item 27?
If you would, when it is appropriate to talk about either moving or having a special meeting to take this matter up in the
I
week
think you
of
just
the-
want to avoid the word special meeting, which, as you may recall in the past, has caused problems. I think you're just saying you'd like to set a meeting for a date certain before June 21st.
Well, before the 7th, or on or before the 7th. I think that's a Thursday, right? Yeah,
But I'll just remind you, the election's June 5th, too.
I know. But this would have been on the May agenda. And I have my,
Is it possible to pick a date
yes.
before we all go off? Because I may have some conflicts that week.
5th, 6th, or 7th?
See, I was going to ask for the 4th.
Oh, 4th? Is that,
The day before the election.
is that the, well, we were not allowed to participate in the elections anyway. I don't know what we're.
Our agency is just very busy, and I just try to keep bringing that to everyone's attention, not just enforcement, it's legal division, responding to last-minute requests for advice, everyone, every PRC. It's just extremely busy. I understand the 5 members here might not be, but it's just taking a lot of task for a specific date when we could wait a day or two is what I would
Well, this
encourage.
essentially could be a one-item agenda because you've got your regular meeting, unless you would prefer to move the regular meeting up. Is the 4th, it seemed to me you said the 4th was the earliest date that it could happen if you went ahead and filed this. So we could have it on the 4th.
Can I ask a question? How is it possible that we are dealing with very specific time frames and the end date doesn't change even if we do something today versus tomorrow versus the next day? Can you tell me how you're coming up with this rule that it's the 4th no matter when we do this?
The 30 days is triggered by publication. Publication is done by OAL. Publication only occurs on the Friday, and you must submit, for publication on the Friday, you must submit 2 Tuesdays ahead of that Friday.
Okay, 2 Tuesdays ahead. I get it.
Well, I need to run.
What? Hello?
Commissioner Hayward is leaving. She has left the meeting, so we'll just proceed, I guess, without her. So continue.
Okay. My question has been answered. Thank you.
We could hold it on Tuesday. Would you, how would you ask that I phrase that? As a special or not a special, but
Just-
a meeting on?
Just to set a meeting for, is that Tuesday, June 4th? Is that what you're suggesting?
Right, that's my motion.
I think that's a Monday.
Monday is the June 4th,
Okay,
Tuesday is
Monday,
the
June 4th.
election. So that's the motion. Is there a second?
I have a question. What's AOL? Administrative?
Office of Administrative Law.
The office, oh, so it's OAL.
Yeah. Oh, what did I say? AOL?
Never
Yeah.
mind.
Oh, that's the other guys with the email, yeah, okay.
Are they like on vacation the second half of July? What's the rush here?
I think the rush is coming from this commission, not them. They're just, OAL just follows this normal schedule that Brian just described about when something needs to be submitted and the earliest they'll consider it noticed. So again, I don't know if it's the same concern you have. I just not sure. We have a meeting set for June 21st. several weeks after the election, when staff will have more time to focus on this and get it back to us with the regular meeting. But the proposal is to set a special meeting, or an additional meeting, I should say, an additional regular meeting.
I'm just wondering why. Why not do it on the 21st if that's when we would ordinarily be meeting?
Well, when I left last month's meeting, I was assured that this would be noticed so that we could hold that vote on the May meeting. Now, and when I got here this morning, I found that, lo and behold, it wasn't done. And it's important to me, it's important to Allison. I know she had told me earlier today that she absolutely had to leave in order to catch her train for an important meeting she has to go to. So I get that she left because she couldn't, I think had literally run the clock out. So I'm asking that we set this meeting, if we have no other business on it, or if you want to make that the June meeting and move it up, I'm open either way, but I beg your indulgence on this.
So that's the motion. Is there a second? Yep. Yeah, sure.
Did Maria?
Sorry, I just have a problem with any date after the 4th, so.
Yeah, this motion is to make it on the 4th.
Oh, I see. And early in the morning?
How early?
I don't know. I mean, I would rather it be earlier than later.
Before 10?
But I don't know. What?
Did you say before 10?
I mean, I'd rather have it be before 10.
Yeah.
Can we do it at 9?
I can make it at 9.
June 5th.
This would be June 4th.
Commissioner Cardenas, the election is on June 5th, Tuesday.
So what would happen on this special meeting that we're not calling a special meeting? What exactly would we be poised to do, just so I understand why we're moving mountains here?
It would be eligible for adoption or rejection.
When does it go to the OAL?
If we submit it by Monday, it would go to OAL right away. Or even if we did it today, it would still go to OAL. They only publish on Fridays. Is that correct?
Correct.
So that's why it's kind of slushy.
Wait a minute. So we're,
Tuesdays before.
so these regulations would actually become effective the day before the election?
No.
No, the effective date is different. That's based on when we file it back with OAL, and then they have to file it with Secretary of State. The effective date is actually 30 days after the OAL files it with Secretary of State, so it's somewhere in the 30 to 60-day range.
So when might it become effective then? Let's say that we had this special, non-special meeting on the 4th, the day before the election.
Submit it 4th or the 5th, or we would submit it that day or the next day, and it generally takes at least 30 days, but anywhere up to 60 days before it's actually has an effective date. We can't pinpoint the date other than that 30 to 60-day time period.
What am I not seeing here?
While you ponder that, unless you have another specific question, I'm still not sure there's a second on the motion, and I want to make sure that we keep moving along.
Commissioner Ardera, are you still on the line?
I am.
Would you mind seconding this motion?
Oh, so, yes, sorry. June 4th at 9 a.m. I second.
Commissioner Darrow.
Yes.
Commissioner Cardenas.
No.
Commissioner Hatch.
Aye.
Chair Rumke.
No.
The motion is tied.
Now, look, I'm open to persuasion, but there's a reason here that's not being stated, and I just, the day before the election, are we not all busy?
I had assurances it would be at the May meeting.
I understand that, and I joined you in asking what in the world happened here.
So,
But it is what it is, and we're going to meet the day before the election.
You're not allowed to electioneer as a commissioner.
all right, I'm not sure what's going on now, but if we're having a off-the-record conversation, perhaps, excuse me, gentlemen, this is not appropriate right now to be having a conversation, perhaps to persuade a vote, I'm not sure. Commissioner Hatch, again, I'll say this isn't appropriate. So as it stands now, the motion to move this forward, this regulation passed. Legal will work with the ad hoc committee to get it to OAL before Tuesday. It will come back and we'll hear it at the June 21st meeting. All right, so I'll move on to item 27.
Hold on, can we go back to that item? If the only choice then is June 21st, I will try to clear my calendar for June 5th. How about that?
Are you making a motion to have a meeting on June 5th, the election day?
Yeah, I mean, by then you'll have answered all the questions, right?
If only, but go on. Is there a second for June 5th?
There's
I
only so
second.
much delay that can be done here, right? I mean, come on.
Commissioner Adaro,
Yes.
Commissioner Cardenas.
No.
Commissioner Hatch.
Aye.
Chair Rumke.
No.
Motion is tied.
I didn't say anything to you. I was just muttering.
I know, but I'm just asking that we
Myself.
not crosstalk. And
No, it's
again, I just want to
directed to
stress
myself.
to this, again, this will be brought back June 21st, having been properly noticed, the language out there. Let's move on to item 27, closure letters and enforcement. We have the staff memo, I believe, Legal Division, Zach Norton's going to come up. Commissioner Odero, you requested this item as stated on the agenda. Would you like to take the lead?
Yes, thank you. And given the time of day that it is and the fact that I also should have been on the road already, I am going to ask that this be moved to the May meeting.
Okay, so you'd like to put over this to the May meeting? Without objection, I'll go ahead and put this on the May agenda. Any objection?
None.
Okay. Thank you. Last thing is executive staff reports. I just want to take a minute. We keep raising the election. I just want to take a minute to thank staff. As detailed in the staff report, all the time that is being spent responding to questions, both from PRCs and legal attorneys, and obviously the External Affairs and Education Division, and they had a particular busy month responding to 1,357 phone requests. A lot of that obviously went to Form 700 information, but I just want to again thank staff. I know this is an extremely busy time and you're being pulled in a lot of directions, but I do appreciate the work you do for the agency, and I know that the public does as well with all your excellent advice and response to questions. Any other comments or questions from the commissioners regarding the staff report?
Yes.
Commissioner Hatch.
I wore myself out on the advice letters, so I'm not going to go there, but I did have some questions on the legislative report, or a question.
Okay.
Philip Ong, Legislative Director. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We're getting to that part of the year where budget subcommittees are going crazy trying to get all of the stuff acted on before they can take the next step, before the governor's revise. And so it made me think about, I don't recall during my tenure here in the last, 13, 14 months, seeing any budget bills in your LEDS report. Is it a past practice that you don't list them, or that you do?
We have not, in the past, listed the specific budget vehicles or trailer bills. Well, I don't think the FPPC hasn't mentioned in trailer bills, but the main budget bill we haven't.
The main budget bill is.
We haven't put into budget reports in the past, or any other subcommittee items, budget subcommittee items.
Well, I know that they do get to you eventually in these budget subcommittees and the full budget committees, because we are in the budget. So I would ask that we please in the future add the budget bills to the legislative report, if that's not too much trouble. I don't expect you to analyze the entire budget, but you could, summarize what's at stake for the commission.
You're talking about just the main budget bill that, or you also, because there are budget items that move through subcommittees that are kind of like bills, but they're not
Well,
bills.
they're
I don't know if you want
they're
those
pieces of the
also.
bill. I'm talking about,
Right.
for the discussion purposes, you want the bill number of the budget bill, and then you can also disclose in your little analysis what item we're in.
Okay. I just want to clarify how much information.
And then, progress on it, where we are.
Okay.
How are we doing on that this year? I know we're small, so we're probably at the tail end. Have they got to us yet, or?
I was just going to say, you're not really I think you should direct your questions regarding the budget to Aaron Peth as the oversight of the budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have 4 positions that we're asking for through budget change proposals to implement legislation that passed last year. 3 positions for the Disclose Act, and 1 position for, I believe it's Senate Bill 45, okay, got that one wrong, which was one of the mass mailing bills. And so we've already gotten through the Assembly Subcommittee, and we're waiting for the Senate.
So they're in, as it's presented, those positions reflected in what's before the budget subs now?
Correct, yes.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
And we can obviously continue to update once we get through the Senate.
Good. Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you. Other commission comments or questions from commissioners regarding the executive staff report?
Yeah, this is Maria, I do.
Okay, Commissioner Odero?
Yes, on the Enforcement Division report.
Okay.
Okay, Galena West here.
Hi, Galena. I have a question on the backlog of cases. Am I reading this correctly, that there's 955 cases backlogged at this point?
We have a 916 case workload right now. So many cases come in each month. As you can see, we received 83 complaints last month and 96 non-filer referrals. So it's a constant moving circle of 916 cases.
I think it would be really helpful for this report to start showing us an aging of these cases, because I don't have a sense of how many of these cases are a year old, 2 years old, a month old. Obviously, a month is not something that I would be concerned about, because especially, as you pointed out, in this election year, everything changes, right? But I think that it would be very, very helpful for the commissioners to know a little bit more about the various stages of resolution, the aging, the types of cases, because I think that for example, if, you know, it might make a difference to me as I'm looking at this to know, you know, we have, you know, all the cases that are 2 years old are, you know, the conflict of interest cases that take so long to investigate. You know, that might be something that is an explanation for a very old case. So I'm wondering what kind of reporting you could give us that would flush some of this out and actually provide some insight.
We started looking into this with the new case management system, so we should be able to have some answers.
So what kind of answers might we see? I think we need to talk about what commissioners would like to see, but I don't know, you know, what's readily available versus, you know, something that you'd actually have to sit down and think about or look at your, you know, count them. But I mean, you obviously know how many there are, so you've got to have them on some kind of database, I would imagine.
Right. In fact, as I said, we just started looking into this. So the analyst that does these reports for us, I believe her words yesterday was, that's going to be rough. So that was the description I've gotten so far. And so we're now drilling down into what we could do, because I started looking at, with the enforcement review, what LA Ethics puts out every month in their report and what San Francisco Ethics puts out in all their reports, in order for us to be proactive to see what information we should also be producing. So I've gathered that information, and then now I'm looking at what our capabilities are.
Is that an in-house analyst or?
Yeah, she's a SSA, staff service analyst.
So, okay. So you're trying to get your head or hands around what your backlog is, and I think that's fine. I think I would like to start seeing some reporting on that regularly. And then I think more of a long term, I think that I would like to see a plan for reducing this backlog, because 916 cases, I don't, you know, you know what would be nice is to have you create a history of what the backlogs have been every year, because it seems to me that 900, and I could be completely wrong, but it seems like 916 cases just is an awful lot of cases. If you're receiving 80 cases a month, let's say they're all flowing, I mean, that means that you've got to have cases that are over a year old.
No, we received 83 plus 96 cases last month. Requests to be
so
chases.
You don't think you have any cases that are over a year old?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I was just giving you the correct numbers.
And I would just, this is Chair Remke, I would just caution the repeated use of backlog. I think the appropriate term is case pendency, because we don't have a point in time. Backlog has a very significant meaning that something is older than an established timeline. As you probably know, Commissioner Odero, all courts adopt court performance standards, which have when something reaches the point of backlog, acknowledging, as Ms. West had said, that there's rolling cases coming in and out. And I know since I've been here, the goal has always been, before Ms. West and since Ms. West, that cases should be resolved in a year or less. And in fact, I have a general statistic I looked at a couple years ago. On average, about 75% of the cases are resolved in 180 days or less. So again, you have this rolling case load, and cases are in case pendency. Again, backlog has a very negative term, which I don't think is appropriate in this context until we get down and look at the numbers a little bit more closely.
If you're in the manufacturing business, that's good news.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner Hatch.
Go ahead, Commissioner Odero.
No, I'm ceding to Commissioner Hatch because I think he had a comment.
I apologize for butting in.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
I just said, in manufacturing, backlog is a good word.
Okay. Well, I think that at some point, we as a commission are going to be able to determine what is that point of when something becomes backlogged. And I think that it may be different depending on the types of cases. But you know, while I appreciate a comment, I don't appreciate a cautionary note. So I'm going to leave it at that, but I would like to start seeing some more reporting on this that provides information for the commissioners to be able to see, you know, how we're performing on that end. You know, and I think that there's going to be different, you know, I imagine that there are some things that you can crank through really quickly, and you know, and I think that there are some cases that obviously are going to take you longer. So I think that it would be good to, as you report on the cases that haven't been resolved yet, what types of cases they are, and then by, you know, by types of cases, how aging them. So if you could do that in these reports going forward, that would be really helpful.
Okay, I'll look into that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Well, Commissioner Cardenas?
Regarding the executive report or future,
Well, let's finish the executive report. Anything else on the executive report? If not, that will be submitted. Okay, and now you want to say something on future issues, Commissioner?
that I just, I want to wonder out loud, how can we, with respect to future agenda items, how can we ensure better that expressed requests, directions from this commission are for having things on the agenda and for moving things at a particular pace, or in the case of Commissioner Hatch last month, it was rather more specific than that, I think. Is it possible to, when you know that you've got a specific request coming from a commissioner made from the dais at the end of a meeting, that if there's any doubt, you just email the commissioner and say, hey, did you mean that you want us to do something next month? Because it's not real clear to us. I mean, is that problematic for any? Because, you know, I might well have stood differently 45 minutes ago on a particular vote of some importance. But it's too late for me to understand how my vote perhaps should have been different. But if the commissioner's request last month had been adhered to in the way that he thinks he asked that it be, and I think he's right about that, then, you know, the minutes from this meeting might reflect different votes, and that's a tough position for any of us to be in, and I don't appreciate being in this position at all.
Right. Well, I'll say two things. Number one, that's why we did add proposed future agenda items to see what's coming up. And I know that at least as to one of these or two of these, there's been follow-up from the commissioner as to when is that going to appear on the agenda. And some of that is, again, staffing concerns. But I think the other thing, and I know there is a big dispute as to what was said or what was agreed to, and I guess I fall into Brian's category of not understanding that was the intent, because again, understanding that pre-notice meant pre-notice and we'd send out what we're going to send out after pre-notice, that was my understanding as well. So all we can do is try to be as specific as possible. That's why I think it was good with this meeting that the proposed regulation has been clearly established a timeline with the ad hoc committee working with legal division to resolve something before Tuesday, to go to OAL at the latest on Tuesday, and the agreement that it's coming back June 21st hearing. So I think to the extent we can be as specific as possible as to timing, so that we're all in agreement, that's what I would recommend.
I think if there's any doubt, just ask us.
Right, I agree.
And before we do adjourn, are we going to get on the agenda for June 22nd? With respect to item 26?
Right, that's what I just said. I think we've said
Well,
that
it didn't-
several times. So I would say yes. The answer is yes, but I believe it's June 21st.
21st, sorry.
June 21st is the next hearing that it will be on. June 21st for the proposed regulation that was moved forward today.
Chair, I have a question.
Okay?
We can always come back via email or via a call and say, hey, can we have a meeting on June 6th? I mean, it's difficult it became problematic, I think, because Commissioner Hayward had to run off, and I understand she has to catch her train, and I respect that, but I think the vote might have been different if Commissioner Hayward had been present, and so I think that if somebody sends an email saying, hey, can we vote on this, because all we're asking is setting a meeting, right, which Mr. Prim said could be done via email as long as we don't discuss the substance of the purpose of that. And I believe I have that very clearly in those wonderful minutes that we get every month. We could revote on that meeting via email, correct? We could just, two commissioners can request it, and then it will happen, right?
I think it would have to be a vote, but I do believe you could set a regular meeting outside the commission hearing. I'm saying that slowly as I look at legal, and I'll let them answer the question.
Yeah.
I would just direct your attention to what Mr. Prim said to us, because I think it's very clearly stated there.
Do you need a moment? Because if so, I could interject something that's totally off topic, but yet immensely important. But only if you need a moment to.
Oh, sure.
All right. Sunday is Earth Day, and I just want to bring that to everyone's attention as we recall that now we are at well over 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That hasn't happened on this particular planet since over 10,000 years ago when the Holocene began, and it's only during this 10,000-year period where the average global mean temperature has been plus or minus 1 degree that we have been able to establish civilizations at all. Happy Earth Day.
I thought you were going to tell us to stop talking and breathing hot air into the atmosphere.
Well, you know, we can reduce our carbon footprint in other ways.
I'm glad you mentioned that. As an electric car owner, third generation, I'm keeping my footprint small. I take the bus from the airport every meeting. I take the bus to the airport every meeting. I'm doing my part.
Okay, legal, do you have an answer?
Chair Remke, can we research this and get back to you?
Yeah, why don't you just send us,
My understanding was
I think
any
the
two
answer.
members could.
which may be
me.
fine, but let's, if you're asking for legal and they're saying they need a minute, so let's have them, they can send out the email, and if that's the answer and that's the will of the commissioners, they could respond to that email with a request for a hearing if that's where we're going with this. So they'll send out the email to all commissioners straight up with the law on setting a meeting.
Tomorrow.
And
Okay, thank you.
then it could be followed up. Anything else?
Yeah, I have something, a couple things.
Okay, Commissioner Odero.
Thank you. I want to make sure that as item 27 from this month's agenda transfers to next month's agenda, we clarify how it was written before my quoted portion. I have a concern. I was going to raise it today as part of our discussion, but I can raise it now and maybe it can just be very quickly fixed. But I noticed that the first sentence, the way that it was written, says that we are it says we're only going to review, and review of the commission's ability to review and modify. And if you read my agenda item, it says we're going to vote on it. So I don't know if that was intentional or just a mishap, but I don't want it to be a situation where we have to bicker over whether we can vote on this item. So.
Well, I think it says clearly this is an agenda item for formal action. So it's hard to dispute that.
But it also says, Chair Remke, review of the commission's ability, and it doesn't say anything about vote. And so it creates an ambiguity, the problem of which I don't want to deal with at the beginning of next month's meeting. I would like it to simply be resolved by having this accurately reflect what I requested. So I requested a review and a vote. I would like this to be absolutely crystal clear that that's what we're going to do.
Okay, anything else?
Yes. In addition to that, I would like to change this to that very last sentence. I think I would like to change it to, based on this, the commission will vote on whether to adopt the recommendation of the legal division as a go-forward procedure, comma, adopt another go-forward procedure, comma, or send this matter to the Attorney General's office requesting a formal opinion.
Okay.
I think I want a third choice in there.
Okay, I'll put that in there.
Yeah. So that's that. The other thing is I would like another agenda item that would follow this one. It can't come before it, as you'll see why in a second. And it would be depending on the action taken by the commission on agenda item, and then you'll fill in the number, whatever you're going to number this. Then I would say, oh, hold on. Sorry, I thought I had this handy. Oh, gosh, my apologies, folks. So it would say, depending on the action taken by the commission, if any, on agenda item whatever, the commission will review the language of the closure letter in the Lucan matter 16/284, and will consider and vote on whether, comma, and if so, how, comma, to amend that letter consistent with its action on agenda item whatever you're going to fill in.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I just want to make sure that those two go together for me.
Okay.
Is there any question about the two going? Is there any question about those agenda items that I could clarify before we hang up?
No.
If you come up with a question, will you send it to us or circulate it to me so that I can answer it in time for this to make it appropriately on the May agenda?
I'm going to put it on the agenda exactly as you stated.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Anything else?
Well, 243 years ago, this nation began to be conceived in the sense that it was at about 5 a.m. on this date, 243 years ago, that the running battle of Lexington and Concord begun. And just so we'll remember that, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Thanks very much for your indulgence.
Okay, anything else from the commissioners, or we'll adjourn? Okay.
Well, actually, 142 years.
Okay, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you. We'll go off the record.